She was hired to look after her comatose boss, but when she took off his clothes... Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Mama, why do rich people always live at the end of long driveways? Caroline Elise Hayes glanced in the rearview mirror at her daughter Ava, who sat in her booster seat pressing her nose against the window. The late March wind rustled through the trees, lining the seemingly endless private road, their branches still mostly bare but showing hints of spring's promise. Not all rich people live at the end of long driveways, baby, Caroline replied, her fingers unconsciously snapping as she contemplated the upcoming interview. And we don't know if these people are rich. They just need some help. Like how you helped Mrs. Rodriguez with her medicine. Ava's honey-colored eyes sparkled with curiosity in the mirror, her colorful hair bows bouncing as she turned her head to track a squirrel darting between trees. Caroline smiled, warmth spreading through her chest at her daughter's innocent comparison. Sort of, but this is different. This person needs more help than Mrs. Rodriguez. He's been sleeping for a long time. Like Sleeping Beauty? Not exactly. Caroline slowed the car as the trees opened up to reveal a sprawling craftsman-style house, its deep green trim and natural stone facade blending seamlessly with the surrounding woodland. It wasn't the mansion Ava had probably been expecting, but it had a quiet dignity about it that spoke of old money and older secrets. He was in an accident, and his brain needs time to heal. The agency had been sparse with details, but the basics were clear enough. Round-the-clock care for a coma patient, Wagner Joel Collins, age 36. The pay was exceptional, enough to finally put aside money for Ava's college fund instead of just dreaming about it. 3 months of work could change their entire future. Caroline parked beside a sleek black SUV and turned to face her daughter. Remember what we talked about. You're going to stay with Mrs. Deborah while I talk to the nice lady about the job. I know, Mama. Ava's face took on the serious expression she wore when making promises. I'll be good and do my homework and not ask for too many cookies. That's my girl. Caroline reached back to tap Ava's knee affectionately before climbing out of the car. As she helped Ava out of her booster seat, the front door of the house opened. A woman in her early 50s emerged, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant twist. You must be Caroline Hayes. I'm Diana Foster, Mr. Collins's estate manager. Her handshake was firm but not aggressive, her smile genuine if reserved. And who is this young lady? I'm Ava Simone Hayes and I'm 7, Ava declared proudly, extending her own tiny hand for a shake that made both adults hide their smiles. Pleased to meet you both. Miss Deborah is waiting in the kitchen with some fresh-baked cookies. Ava, would you like to join her while your mother and I talk business? Ava looked to Caroline for permission, then skipped ahead when Diana pointed the way through the house. Caroline watched her daughter disappear around a corner before following Diana in the opposite direction, her practical nursing shoes silent on the hardwood floors. The house was beautiful, but not ostentatious, filled with warm woods and natural light. Family photos lined the walls, but Caroline noticed they were all at least a decade old, judging by the clothing and hairstyles. No recent additions. Diana led her into what appeared to be a home office, gesturing for Caroline to take a seat in one of 2 leather chairs facing a substantial desk. I'll be direct, Ms. Hayes. Your references are impeccable, and your experience with long-term care patients is exactly what we're looking for. The position is yours if you want it. Caroline's fingers stilled mid-snap. Just like that, I thought this was an interview. It was. From the moment you stepped out of your car. Diana's eyes crinkled slightly. I've learned to trust my instincts about people. You carry yourself with a quiet confidence that speaks of competence, and the way you interact with your daughter tells me volumes about your capacity for patience and compassion. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Caroline said carefully, but shouldn't we discuss the patient's condition, his needs, the schedule? Of course. Diana pulled a thick folder from her desk drawer. Mr. Collins was in a serious car accident 3 months ago. The initial coma was medically induced to help manage brain swelling, but when they attempted to bring him out of it, she paused, something flickering behind her professional demeanor. He simply didn't wake up. Physically, he's healing well. The doctors are optimistic about eventual recovery, but they can't say when. Caroline nodded, her mind already cataloguing the likely care requirements. What's his current level of responsiveness? Minimal, occasional hand movements, changes in breathing patterns, nothing definitively purposeful yet. Diana handed over the folder. All his medical information is in here, along with emergency contacts and protocols. The position would require you to live on site 5 days a week, with relief nurses covering your days off. Room and board are provided, and of course, in addition to the salary we discussed. Caroline's heart skipped. She hadn't realized it was a live-in position. "My daughter would be more than welcome to stay with you," Diana interjected smoothly. "There's a lovely guest suite with 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, completely separate from the main living areas. Ava could keep her regular school schedule. We're only 20 minutes from Newark." It was almost too perfect. Caroline had learned early in life that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. She flipped through the folder, scanning for red flags, but everything appeared meticulously documented and above board. "Would you like to meet him?" Diana asked quietly. Caroline looked up, surprised. "He's here. This is his home. We had it modified with the necessary medical equipment rather than leaving him in a long-term care facility." Diana stood. "Sometimes familiar surroundings can help with recovery." They climbed to the 2nd floor, Diana leading the way to a large corner room bathed in natural light from wide windows. The medical equipment was top of the line, but somehow didn't dominate the space, which still felt more like a bedroom than a hospital room. And there he was. Wagner Joel Collins lay still against crisp white sheets, his broad chest rising and falling in steady rhythm with the soft beep of monitors. He was handsome in a classical way, with strong features and a well-maintained beard that someone had clearly been trimming regularly. His light brown hair was neat, his skin healthy-looking despite his condition. Caroline approached the bed with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years caring for vulnerable patients. She noted the positioning of his limbs, the lack of pressure sores, the overall quality of care he'd been receiving. Everything spoke of attention to detail and genuine concern for his comfort. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his chart. "Of course." She began her review, asking pointed questions about his medication schedule, physical therapy routine, and any observed patterns in his responses. Diana answered each query with precise detail, and Caroline found herself increasingly impressed with the level of organization. "I'll need to make arrangements for Ava," Caroline said finally, looking up from the charts. "Give notice at our apartment. Talk to her school about the commute. Does that mean you're accepting the position?" Caroline turned back to look at Wagner. Something about him tugged at her consciousness, a whisper of familiarity she couldn't quite place. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the practical aspects of the opportunity in front of her. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'd like to start as soon as possible." "Wonderful. Shall we discuss the details over coffee? I believe I hear your daughter charming Miss Deborah out of a second cookie." As they headed downstairs, Caroline cast one last look at her new patient. The sunlight caught his profile, highlighting a thin, pale scar along his left clavicle, barely visible above his hospital gown. Something about it made her pause, but Diana was already at the stairs, and there was paperwork to complete. Later, she told herself. There would be plenty of time to learn every detail about Wagner Joel Collins. After all, she was now responsible for his care, and Caroline Elise Hayes took her responsibilities very seriously. She didn't know it yet, but that scar would soon turn her carefully ordered world upside down, awakening memories she'd locked away 12 years ago of a summer love that had marked her soul as surely as that pale line marked his skin. For now, though, she followed Diana downstairs to where Ava's laughter echoed through the house, her fingers unconsciously snapping as she mentally organized all the tasks ahead of her. One step at a time, she thought, one step at a time. A week into her new position, Caroline had already established a rhythm. Each morning began the same way. She'd wake at 6, prepare Ava for school, and then begin Wagner's daily care routine while her daughter caught the private bus Diana had arranged to take her to and from school. This morning, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the early April sunshine slanted through the windows, or perhaps it was the unusual stillness in the air. Caroline's fingers snapped absently as she organized the medical supplies for Wagner's morning care. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," she said softly, following her practice of speaking to him as if he could respond. Research suggested coma patients might be able to hear, and Caroline believed in covering all possibilities. It's Tuesday, April 9th, and it's going to be a beautiful spring day. She began her routine checks, vital signs, medication administration, careful examination for any skin issues. Everything was normal, Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu that had been growing stronger each day. As she prepared to give him his morning bath, Caroline found herself studying his face. There was something about the angle of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows even in unconsciousness, that tugged at her memory. She'd been too busy with the practical aspects of settling in to really look at him before, but now, "Let's get you cleaned up," she murmured, pushing the mysterious feeling aside. She worked efficiently, her movements practiced and professional, as she washed his face, neck, and chest. Then she saw it again, the scar on his clavicle. In the morning light, it was more prominent than it had been that first day. Long and thin, slightly raised, curving along the bone like a painter's brush stroke. Her hand froze mid-motion. Summer rain pattering against windows, thunder rolling in the distance. Gentle fingers tracing that same scar as a deep voice explained, "Fell out of a tree when I was 12. Broke my collarbone." Caroline jerked back, her heart pounding. No, it couldn't be. That was impossible. But the memory wouldn't be denied. It flooded back with crushing clarity. A brief summer romance 12 years ago, just before she started nursing school. 3 perfect months with a man who'd captured her heart and then vanished without a trace. A man whose real name she'd never even known, because they'd both been playing at being different people that summer. She'd called him Jack. He'd called her Cora. "Oh, God," she whispered, sinking into the chair beside his bed. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the scar again. The texture was exactly as she remembered, smooth in the center, slightly raised at the edges. But it couldn't be him. The timing was wrong. The name was wrong. Everything was wrong. And yet, the door opened, startling her. Diana entered with a stack of fresh linens. "Everything all right, Caroline? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, she had. Caroline forced herself to stand, professional mask sliding back into place. "Everything's fine. Just a bit tired. Ava had trouble sleeping last night." Diana nodded sympathetically, but Caroline caught the slight narrowing of her eyes. "The estate manager missed very little. The physical therapist will be here at 10. Will you need anything before then?" "No, thank you. I'll have Mr. Collins ready." After Diana left, Caroline finished Wagner's bath with mechanical precision, her mind racing. She needed to think this through logically. So what if he had a similar scar? So what if something about his features reminded her of a man she'd known 12 years ago? Coincidences happened. But as she worked, more details aligned. The shape of his hands, the small birthmark behind his right ear, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. She pulled his medical file from the bedside cabinet, flipping through until she found his basic information. Birth date, September 15th, 1988. The age was right. Previous medical history was sparse, as if his records didn't go back very far. "Who are you, really?" she whispered, studying his face. "And why do I feel like I know you?" The morning passed in a blur. The physical therapist came and went, commenting on Wagner's excellent muscle tone and lack of atrophy. Caroline assisted mechanically, her mind elsewhere, lost in memories she'd locked away years ago, running through summer rain, laughing, sharing secrets in whispered conversations, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious, something rare, his voice deep and warm saying "Cora" like it was a prayer. During her lunch break, while Miss Deborah watched Wagner, Caroline retreated to her room and dug through her closet until she found an old shoebox. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small collection of mementos from that summer, a movie ticket stub, a pressed flower, a few Polaroid photos. Her hands shook as she lifted out the photos. They were faded now, but she could still make out the images. A younger version of herself, hair in braids, laughing at something off camera, and there, just the edge of a profile, a glimpse of a jawline, a hint of a smile. She'd never had a clear photo of him. They'd been playing at anonymity that summer, both pretending to be someone else, both running from something they'd never discussed. The door creaked, and Caroline quickly shoved everything back in the box as Ava bounded in. "Mama, Ms. Deborah let me have lunch in the garden and I saw a butterfly and—" Ava stopped, noticing her mother's expression. "Are you sad?" "No, baby." Caroline pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her coconut shampoo. "I'm just thinking about something from a long time ago." "About Daddy?" Caroline's heart clenched. She'd always told Ava that her father wasn't in the picture, that sometimes grown-ups made choices that hurt other people, but that it didn't make her any less loved. She'd never mentioned that summer, never spoken about the man who disappeared without knowing he'd left behind more than just memories. No, not about him. Caroline kissed the top of Ava's head. How about you tell me more about that butterfly? Later, after Ava was absorbed in her homework and Ms. Deborah had gone home, Caroline returned to Wagner's room for his evening care. The setting sun painted the walls in shades of gold and amber, reminding her of another sunset, another time. As she checked his IV lines and adjusted his positioning, she found herself humming softly, an old habit she'd picked up that summer. The tune was Dream a Little Dream of Me, the song that had been playing the first time she'd danced with Jack. Wagner's fingers twitched. Caroline froze, watching intently. It could have been an involuntary movement. Those were common enough in coma patients. But something made her continue humming, watching his face for any sign of response. His fingers twitched again, and this time she was sure it wasn't random. The movement had purpose, like he was trying to catch the notes in the air. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, her heart racing. "Do you remember this song?" There was no further response, but it was enough to shake her certainty that this was all coincidence. She sank into the chair beside his bed, her professional detachment crumbling. "I think I know who you are," she said softly, taking his hand. "And if I'm right." "We have a lot to talk about when you wake up." The monitors beeped steadily, marking time like a metronome. Outside, a car door slammed as Diana left for the day. Somewhere in the house, Ava was probably sprawled on her bed with her favorite stuffed unicorn, reading one of her endless collection of library books. Life was moving forward all around them, but in this room, time seemed to fold back on itself. Past and present blurred together until Caroline wasn't sure which was which anymore. She squeezed Wagner's hand gently. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere this time. And when you're ready, maybe we can both stop pretending to be other people." The sun set fully, leaving the room in twilight. Caroline didn't move to turn on the lights yet, letting the shadows gather like memories in the corners. In the dim light, she could almost believe she was 20 again, falling in love with a man who called himself Jack, and looked at her like she held all the answers to questions he hadn't even asked yet. But she wasn't 20 anymore, and the man in the bed wasn't Jack. He was Wagner Joel Collins, her patient, a man with a different name and a different life. Even if he was the same person, 12 years was a lifetime. They were different people now. Still, as she finally stood to turn on the lights and continue her evening routine, she couldn't help but wonder, if he remembered her, would he see Cora in her face the way she saw Jack in his? And more importantly, what would he think when he learned about the other piece of himself he'd left behind? A bright-eyed 7-year-old who had his smile, even if neither of them knew it yet. The following week brought subtle changes to Wagner's condition. They were the kind of changes that only someone with Caroline's trained eye, and perhaps her deeply personal interest, would notice. His breathing would change rhythm when she spoke. His fingers would occasionally twitch during his morning care. Once, she could have sworn she saw his eyelids flutter when Ava's laughter drifted in from the hallway. Neural storms, Dr. Morris called them during his weekly visit. Common in coma patients. Don't read too much into them, but Caroline knew better. After 15 years in nursing, she'd learned to trust her instincts. These weren't random neural storms. They were signs of someone fighting their way back to consciousness. "Your daughter seems quite taken with the patient," Dr. Morris commented as he finished his examination. "I saw her reading to him yesterday." Caroline's fingers snapped reflexively at the observation. "Ava reads to everyone. It's her thing." She kept her tone casual, though her heart raced at the memory of walking in on Ava, perched in the oversized armchair by Wagner's bed, carefully sounding out words from Charlotte's Web. "Well, keep encouraging it. Stimulation is good, even if we can't measure the direct impact." He made a final note in Wagner's chart. "Call me if there are any significant changes." After the doctor left, Caroline went through Wagner's afternoon care routine, talking to him as she worked. She'd taken to telling him about her day, about Ava's adventures at school, about the changing spring weather. Anything to maintain a connection. "Ava got an A on her science project," she said as she checked his IV lines. "The one about butterfly life cycles. She insisted on bringing the chrysalis to show you, remember? I think she's convinced you can see through your eyelids." A subtle change in his breathing made her pause. Was that a response, or just coincidence? "She's so much like you," Caroline whispered, then caught herself. She had no right to say such things. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I mean, she's special. Sees the world differently than most people." The door creaked open, and Caroline straightened quickly as Diana entered. "Everything all right?" The estate manager's keen eyes missed nothing. "Yes, just finishing up his afternoon care." Caroline busied herself with straightening Wagner's blankets. "Did you need something?" "Actually, yes." Diana closed the door softly. "I've noticed something interesting these past few weeks, Caroline." Caroline's heart skipped a beat. Had she been too obvious? Had Diana noticed how she sometimes touched Wagner's scar, lost in memory? "Oh? Mr. Collins's readings improve when you're in the room. His oxygen levels, his heart rate, they're all marginally better during your shifts." Diana's expression was unreadable, even more so when your daughter visits. That's not unusual," Caroline managed. "Coma patients often respond to consistent care and familiar voices." "Familiar voices," Diana repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." She moved to the window, looking out at the garden where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. "You know, I've worked for the Collins family for 30 years. I knew Wagner's parents before they passed. Knew him when he was just a rebellious teenager, before he disappeared for nearly a decade." Caroline's fingers stilled mid-snap. "Disappeared?" "Mm-hmm. Right after college. Said he needed to find himself." Diana turned back to face her. "When he came back 5 years ago, he was different. Settled somehow, but sad, like he'd left something important behind." The implications hung heavy in the air. Caroline forced herself to keep her expression neutral, professional. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because, Miss Hayes, I'm very good at my job. Part of that job is protecting Wagner's interests." Diana's voice softened slightly. "And part of it is knowing when to let certain truths come to light naturally." Before Caroline could respond, a small voice called from downstairs, "Mama, I'm home." "You should go," Diana said. "Your daughter needs you." "We can continue this conversation another time." Caroline hesitated, looking between Diana and Wagner. The estate manager's words felt like both a warning and a permission, though for what, she wasn't quite sure. "Go on," Diana insisted gently. "I'll sit with him for a while." Downstairs, Ava was bouncing with excitement, her backpack still hanging off one shoulder. Mama, can I show Mr. Wagner my art project? Please, I got a gold star." "Baby, Mr. Wagner needs his rest right now." Caroline helped her daughter with her backpack, noticing the paint smudges on her uniform sleeve. "Maybe later, okay? But he likes when I visit. I can tell." Ava's honey-colored eyes were earnest. "His face gets less scrunchy when I read to him, and sometimes his fingers move like he wants to turn the pages." Caroline's throat tightened. Of course Ava would notice such things. She had always been extraordinarily observant. "Tell you what, why don't you tell me about your art project while we have a snack? Then maybe we can visit Mr. Wagner before dinner." Later that evening, after Ava was asleep, Caroline returned to Wagner's room for final checks. The night nurse wouldn't arrive for another hour, and she found herself lingering, studying his face in the soft lamplight. "I don't know if Diana's right," she said softly. "I don't know if you can really hear me better than anyone else. But I think maybe you can, and I think maybe you're trying to find your way back." She took his hand, something she usually avoided doing outside of necessary care. His skin was warm, familiar, in a way that made her heart ache. "I have so many questions," she continued. "Why did you leave that summer? Where did you go? Why did you change your name? And most importantly," she swallowed hard, "would knowing about Ava make you fight harder to wake up, or would it push you deeper into the darkness?" The monitors beeped steadily, offering no answers. Outside, crickets had begun their evening chorus, a sound that always reminded her of that long-ago summer. She'd been so young then, so convinced that love could conquer anything. Now she knew better. Love wasn't always enough. Sometimes it was just the beginning of a much longer, more complicated story. "Mama?" Caroline turned to find Ava in the doorway, clutching her stuffed unicorn. "Baby, what are you doing up?" "I had a dream." Ava padded into the room in her rainbow pajamas. "About Mr. Wagner. He was in a garden, but he couldn't find his way out. He kept calling for someone named Cora." The blood drained from Caroline's face. "It was just a dream, sweetie." "I know." Ava climbed into her lap, settling against her chest. "But dreams are important sometimes. That's what you always say." Caroline held her daughter close, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. Over Ava's head, she watched Wagner's face, searching for any sign of recognition, any hint that somewhere in the darkness of his mind, he was dreaming too. "Can I tell him a story?" Ava asked. "Just a short one?" "Okay, one short story." Ava turned in Caroline's lap to face Wagner. "Once upon a time," she began in her clear child's voice, "there was a princess who was lost in a maze. She couldn't find her way out, but she wasn't scared because she knew someone was looking for her. She just had to wait and be brave, and eventually they would find each other again." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. How did children always seem to know exactly what needed to be said? "That's a beautiful story, baby," she whispered. "It's not finished yet," Ava said seriously, "but that's okay. The best stories take time." As if in response, Wagner's fingers twitched against the blanket. Ava gasped softly. "See? He liked it too." "I think you're right." Caroline pressed a kiss to her daughter's temple. "Now back to bed. You have school tomorrow." After tucking Ava back in, Caroline returned to Wagner's room one last time. The night nurse would arrive soon, but she needed a moment to collect herself. "Your daughter is amazing," she told him quietly. "She has your heart, sees straight to the truth of things. And maybe she's right. Maybe the best stories do take time." She touched his scar one last time, allowing herself to remember the way he used to laugh, the way he used to look at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever had. "Find your way back to us, Jack," she whispered. "Or Wagner, or whoever you really are. We'll be here waiting." As she turned to leave, she could have sworn she felt his fingers curl slightly, trying to hold on to her hand. But when she looked back, he was still as ever, lost in whatever dreams or memories held him captive. The night nurse arrived, and Caroline gave her report with professional detachment. But as she walked back to her suite, she found herself humming that old song again, "Dream a Little Dream of Me," and wondering if somewhere in the darkness he was humming along. Spring had fully arrived in Newark, bringing with it a riot of colors to the garden outside Wagner's window. Caroline stood adjusting his blinds one morning, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the newly leafed branches, when she heard it, a change in his breathing pattern, deeper and more irregular than usual. She turned quickly, her trained eye catching subtle movements, fingers flexing against the sheets, eyelids twitching, throat working as if he were trying to swallow. These weren't the usual small responses she'd grown accustomed to over the past weeks. This was different. "Wagner," she called softly, moving to his bedside. Her fingers snapped unconsciously as she assessed his vital signs. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered more intensely, and his hand moved, not just a twitch this time, but a deliberate attempt to lift it from the bed. Caroline's heart raced as she pressed the call button for Diana. "Take your time," she murmured, taking his hand. "Don't fight too hard. Just follow my voice." Diana appeared in the doorway, instantly alert at Caroline's expression. "I'll call Dr. Morris." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Morris arrived, conducted his examination, and confirmed what Caroline had already suspected. Wagner was showing strong signs of emerging from his coma. "These transitions can take time," the doctor cautioned. "Hours, days, sometimes weeks. And there's no way to predict his cognitive state when he does fully wake." Caroline nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor even as her mind raced with implications. What would he remember? Would he know her? Would he recognize himself in Ava's smile? "I'll increase my monitoring," she said, focusing on practical matters. "Watch for signs of distress or confusion." After the doctor left, Diana lingered. "Fine, perhaps we should limit Ava's visits for now," she suggested gently, "until we know more about his condition." Caroline's fingers stilled mid-snap. "You're right," she agreed reluctantly. "The transition period can be unpredictable." But explaining this to Ava proved challenging. "But why can't I read to him?" her daughter demanded that afternoon, lower lip trembling. "He needs his stories." "How will he find his way back without stories?" Caroline pulled Ava into her lap, breathing in the familiar scent of school crayons and strawberry shampoo. "Remember what we learned about butterflies, how they need time in their chrysalis before they can fly?" "Mr. Wagner isn't a butterfly, Mama." "No, but like a butterfly, his brain needs time to remember how to work properly. Too much stimulation right now might confuse him." Ava considered this, her small face serious, "like when I'm trying to wake up and everything's too bright and noisy." "Exactly like that, baby." Caroline kissed her daughter's forehead, marveling at her intuitive understanding. "Just for a little while, okay?" "Okay." Ava slid from her lap and went to her backpack, pulling out a piece of paper. "Can you at least give him this? I drew it in art class today." Caroline took the drawing, her throat tightening. It showed 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, a tall man with brown hair, a woman with long, dark hair, and a small girl with curly hair, a family. It's beautiful, sweetie. I'll make sure he sees it when he's ready. That night, after Ava was asleep, Caroline sat beside Wagner's bed reviewing his charts. His readings continued to show increasing signs of consciousness, better respiratory rates, more frequent movements, stronger responses to stimuli. "You're really coming back, aren't you?" she whispered, allowing herself to study his face. In the soft lamplight, she could see more clearly the man she'd known 12 years ago, the same slight furrow between his brows, the same strong jaw, the same gentle set to his mouth. She pulled Ava's drawing from her pocket, smoothing it carefully. "Our daughter drew this today. She sees something in you, something familiar. Children are like that sometimes. They recognize truth before adults do." His fingers twitched against the sheets, and Caroline found herself reaching for his hand before she could stop herself. To her surprise, his fingers curled weakly around hers. "That's it," she encouraged softly. "You're doing so well. Just take your time." She began humming their song, watching as his features relaxed slightly at the familiar melody. It was becoming their ritual, this quiet time in the evening when she could drop her professional mask and just be Cora again, the girl who'd fallen in love with a mysterious stranger one summer long ago. A sound from the doorway made her turn. Diana stood there, a knowing look in her eyes. "I've been doing some research," the estate manager said quietly, entering the room. "About the time Wagner was away." Caroline's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Oh, he spent some time in Miami. Summer of 2012. Diana's gaze was piercing. "Worked as a bartender at a place called the Blue Room. Called himself Jack." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Caroline's fingers tightened unconsciously around Wagner's hand. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you already knew." Diana moved to stand by the window, looking out at the darkened garden. "I've watched you with him. The way you touch his scar sometimes, when you think no one's looking. The way you hum that old song, the way your daughter has his smile." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "I wasn't sure. Not completely. It seemed impossible. Life often is." Diana turned back to face her. "Well, what are you going to do when he wakes up?" "I don't know." Caroline looked down at their joined hands. "He left without a word that summer. Changed his name, built a new life. Maybe he had good reasons. Maybe he doesn't want to remember. Or maybe," Diana suggested gently, "he's been looking for what he left behind all these years without even knowing it." Before Caroline could respond, Wagner's hand tightened around hers. Not just a reflex this time, but a real grip. Both women froze, watching as his eyelids fluttered more intensely than before. "Wagner," Caroline called softly, slipping automatically into her professional tone. "Can you hear me?" His lips moved, forming shapes without sound. Caroline leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Core." The whisper was barely audible, rough from months of disuse. "Cora?" Diana's sharp intake of breath matched Caroline's own. "I'll get Dr. Morris," the estate manager said, already moving toward the door. Caroline barely heard her leave. Her world had narrowed to Wagner's face, to the way his eyelids were fighting to open, to the way his fingers clutched at hers like a lifeline. "I'm here," she whispered, professional distance forgotten. "I'm right here, Jack." His eyes opened just a crack, the faintest sliver of blue-gray before closing again. But it was enough. In that brief moment of consciousness, she'd seen recognition in his gaze. He knew her. The next few hours were a whirlwind of medical checks and evaluations. Dr. Morris seemed pleased with Wagner's progress, but cautioned against pushing too hard, too fast. "The brain needs time to adjust," he explained. "Don't expect too much too quickly." But Caroline knew something the doctor didn't. She'd seen it in that fleeting moment of awareness, not just consciousness returning, but memory, understanding, recognition. Later, after the excitement had died down and Wagner had slipped back into a lighter sleep, Caroline sat in the quiet of his room, watching the moonlight paint patterns on the wall. Diana had gone home, the night nurse was doing rounds downstairs, and Ava was sleeping peacefully in their suite. "You called me Cora," she said softly to Wagner's sleeping form. "You remembered, but how much? Do you remember everything? Do you want to remember everything?" She touched his scar gently, remembering that rainy afternoon when he'd first told her its story. They'd been different people then, younger, freer, unburdened by the weight of secrets and lost years. "We have so much to talk about," she whispered, "so much to figure out. But first, you need to come back to us completely. Take your time. We've waited 12 years. We can wait a little longer." As if in response, his fingers twitched against the sheets, reaching for something or someone in his dreams. Caroline took his hand, humming their song softly as the spring night deepened around them, full of promise and possibility. And somewhere in the house, in a room filled with stuffed animals and dream catchers, a little girl slept peacefully, unaware that her simple crayon drawing had captured a truth that would soon change all their lives forever. The next 3 days were a delicate dance of progress and patience. Wagner drifted in and out of consciousness, each period of awareness lasting slightly longer than the last. Caroline maintained her professional demeanor during the day, when doctors and therapists cycled through with their evaluations and exercises, but the nights were different. In the quiet hours, when the house settled into silence and even Ava's endless energy had finally stilled, Caroline allowed herself to simply sit with him. Sometimes she'd talk about their summer together, voice barely above a whisper, reminding him of moments she wasn't even sure he remembered. Tonight was one of those nights. The spring rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a peaceful rhythm that reminded her of another rainy night. 12 years ago. "You told me once that rainy nights were for sharing secrets," she said softly, organizing his medications with unconsciously snapping fingers. "Do you remember? We sat on that old pier getting soaked, and you said some truths only come out when the sky is crying." Wagner's eyes fluttered open, more focused than they'd been earlier in the day. His gaze found her immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Cora," he whispered, the name rough but clear. Caroline's hands stilled. "You should rest your voice. The doctors said, dance." The words seemed to take immense effort. "You danced in the rain." Her heart skipped. "You remember that?" His fingers twitched on the blanket, reaching for her. She took his hand automatically, professional boundaries blurring in the intimate darkness. "Blue dress," he managed, spinning, laughing. Tears pricked Caroline's eyes. That blue sundress had been her favorite that summer, worn soft from washing and salt air. She'd kept it for years afterward, unable to let go of the memories woven into its fabric. "You're doing so well," she said, squeezing his hand gently. "But don't push too hard. We have time." His brow furrowed with concentration. "Changed. My name. Had to." "Shh," she soothed, seeing the monitors register his increasing agitation. "That doesn't matter right now. Focus on getting stronger." But Wagner was fighting to stay conscious, to communicate something important. His fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "Didn't want to leave." His eyes locked onto hers, desperate for her to understand. "Had to protect." Before he could finish, exhaustion pulled him back under. Caroline sat in the darkness, her mind racing. Protect? Protect what? Or whom? A small sound from the doorway made her turn. Ava stood there in her favorite unicorn pajamas, looking impossibly small in the large doorframe. "I had another dream about him," she said, padding into the room. He was trying to tell someone something important, but the words kept floating away like bubbles. Caroline lifted her daughter onto her lap, marveling at the way Ava's dreams seemed to mirror reality. Sometimes when people wake up from being asleep for a long time, it's hard for them to say what they want to say. Ava leaned her head against Caroline's chest, studying Wagner's sleeping face. "He looks sad when he sleeps, like he's trying to remember something that makes him happy, but it keeps slipping away." "What makes you think that, baby?" His eyebrows get all scrunchy, like when I'm trying to remember where I put my favorite hair bow. Ava reached out to touch Wagner's hand hesitantly, "But when you're here, they get less scrunchy, like your voice helps him remember the happy things." Caroline's throat tightened. When had her daughter become so perceptive? "We should let him rest," she said, standing with Ava in her arms. "It's way past your bedtime." "Can I leave him my unicorn?" Ava asked. "Just for tonight. Sometimes when I can't remember my happy dreams, Sparkles helps me find them again." Caroline hesitated, then nodded. Ava carefully tucked her beloved stuffed animal next to Wagner's pillow. "Sweet dreams, Mr. Wagner," she whispered. "So I hope Sparkles helps you find your happy memories." After tucking Ava back into bed, Caroline returned to find Diana in Wagner's room, examining the stuffed unicorn with an odd expression. "Your daughter has quite an intuitive spirit," the estate manager said quietly. "She sees things others miss," Caroline agreed, adjusting Wagner's blankets. "So sometimes I think she understands more than I do. Children often do." Diana moved to the window, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass. "I received some interesting information today about Wagner's time away." Caroline's fingers began snapping again, betraying her nervousness. "Oh, he was looking for someone. Spent years searching, actually. Diana turned to face her. A woman named Cora. Ring any bells? The air seemed to thicken in Caroline's lungs. How do you know this? Old private investigator bills. Journal entries. He never stopped looking. Diana's expression softened. But he was looking for the wrong name, wasn't he? Because Cora wasn't really Cora, just like Jack wasn't really Jack. We were both running from something that summer, Caroline admitted quietly. Both pretending to be someone else. It seemed safer that way. And now? Now. Caroline looked at Wagner's sleeping face, at the way his features had relaxed slightly, as if Ava's unicorn really was helping him find peaceful dreams. Now I don't know what's safe anymore. He's trying to tell me something important about why he left, why he changed his name, but he's not strong enough yet. And what about what you need to tell him? Diana's gaze was piercing. About a certain 7-year-old miracle who has his smile. Before Caroline could respond, Wagner stirred, his hand reaching out blindly. Without thinking, she moved to take it, and his fingers curled around hers with surprising strength. Stay, he whispered, eyes still closed. Please, Cora. Diana moved quietly toward the door. I'll have Miss Deborah check on Ava tonight. You should be here when he wakes again. After Diana left, Caroline settled into the chair beside Wagner's bed, still holding his hand. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, creating a cocoon of peaceful sound around them. I'm here, she whispered, and when you're ready, when you're stronger, we have so much to talk about, so many secrets to share on a rainy night. His fingers tightened slightly on hers, and she began to hum their song softly. Outside, the spring rain washed the world clean, preparing it for new growth, new beginnings, new truths waiting to be revealed. On the pillow beside him, Ava's unicorn stood guard, its glass eyes reflecting the soft light like stars, watching over dreams and memories as they slowly found their way back to the surface. And somewhere in the house, a little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of bubbles filled with words floating up to a rain-washed sky, waiting for the right moment to pop and release their secrets into the world. Caroline watched the rise and fall of Wagner's chest, counting breaths like heartbeats, like moments, like the years that had separated them. Soon, she knew, all their carefully kept secrets would come spilling out. Soon, they would have to face the truth of who they were and what they had lost and found in the 12 years between that summer and now. But for tonight, in the gentle rain and peaceful darkness, it was enough to simply be here, holding his hand, helping him find his way back to consciousness, back to memory, back to her, and maybe, just maybe, back to the daughter he didn't know was waiting to meet him. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light across Wagner's room as Caroline helped him sit up for the first time. His recovery had accelerated over the past 2 days. His speech was clearer, his movements more coordinated, and his periods of consciousness stretched longer. Easy now, she murmured, supporting his back as he adjusted to the new position. How's the dizziness? Better. His voice was stronger today, though still rough around the edges. Everything's clearer. Caroline's fingers snapped unconsciously as she checked his vital signs, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the way his gaze followed her movements. There was recognition in his eyes now, not just of her presence, but of their shared past. Dr. Morris will be pleased with your progress, she said, adjusting his pillows. The physical therapist thinks we can try standing tomorrow if your strength continues to improve. Wagner caught her hand as she withdrew, his grip surprisingly firm. Caroline, she stilled. It was the first time he'd used her real name since waking. Yes, not Cora anymore, he said softly, just like I'm not Jack. No, she agreed, her heart racing. They were not those people anymore. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. I remember, more each day, the pier, the rain, the way you laughed when I tried to teach you pool. Wagner, I never wanted to leave. His blue-grey eyes held hers, intense with the need to make her understand. They found me, had to protect you. Before she could ask who they were, Diana appeared in the doorway. Good morning. Oh, excellent, you're sitting up. Caroline withdrew her hand quickly, stepping back into her professional role. His vital signs are stable, and he's showing good muscle control. Wonderful progress. Diana moved into the room, carrying a folder. The doctors think you might be ready for some mental exercises, Wagner, perhaps looking at some old photographs to help jog your memory. Wagner's face tightened almost imperceptibly. What kind of photographs? Family albums, mostly. From before your time away. Diana's choice of words was careful, measured. I thought it might help fill in some gaps. Later, he said, his voice carrying a note of authority that surprised Caroline. Despite months of illness, something of the man he'd become, Wagner Collins, whoever that was, showed through. I need to rest first. Diana nodded, but Caroline caught the calculating look in her eyes. Of course, we'll try again when you're stronger. After Diana left, Wagner slumped slightly, the brief show of strength wearing him out. Caroline moved to help him lie back down. You should rest, she said professionally. Save your energy for physical therapy this afternoon. Wait, he caught her wrist again. The girl who visits sometimes. Your daughter. Caroline's heart stopped for a moment. Yes. Ava. She has your smile. His eyes were searching her face, but her laugh, it reminds me of someone. Before Caroline could respond, a small voice called from downstairs. Mama, I'm home. Go, Wagner said softly. She needs you. Caroline hesitated, torn between the weight of unspoken truths and her daughter's call. We'll talk later, he nodded, already drifting towards sleep. We have time now. Downstairs, Ava was bursting with excitement, her school uniform slightly rumpled and her hair escaping its neat bows. Mama, look what I made in art class. She thrust a paper toward Caroline, another drawing, this one showing a man standing in what looked like a garden maze, following a trail of butterflies toward a woman and child waiting at the exit. It's beautiful, baby, Caroline said, her throat tight. Is this for Mr. Wagner? Ms. Deborah said he's getting better at talking now. Can I visit him? Please, I'll be super quiet and not tire him out. Caroline's fingers snapped as she considered. Wagner was stronger now, more aware, and after his question about Ava's laugh, let me check on him first, okay? If he's awake and feeling up to it, maybe a short visit. Ava bounced on her toes. I'll get my library book, in case he wants a story. Upstairs, Caroline found Wagner awake and alert, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression. How are you feeling? She asked, checking his readings. Up for a brief visitor. His eyes lit with understanding. Ava? Only if you're sure you're strong enough, please. Something in his voice made her look at him sharply. There was an intensity in his gaze, a hunger she recognized. Did he suspect? Had he begun to piece things together? Before she could analyze it further, Ava appeared in the doorway, clutching her book and drawing. She approached the bed carefully, studying Wagner with serious eyes. Hi, Mr. Wagner. I made you a picture, and I brought Bridge to Terabithia in case you want a story. Mama says you're getting better at talking now. Wagner's face softened in a way Caroline had never seen before. Thank you, Ava. I'd love to see your picture. Ava handed him the drawing, explaining earnestly. See, the butterflies are showing him the way out of the maze, like how Mama says your brain is finding its way back to being awake. Wagner stared at the drawing for a long moment, his hand trembling slightly. It's perfect, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Would you read to me? Ava beamed, climbing carefully into the chair beside his bed. As she opened her book and began reading in her clear child's voice, Caroline watched Wagner's face. He was drinking in every detail of Ava, the way she sounded out difficult words, the precise way she turned pages, the little furrow between her brows when she concentrated, the same furrow he got when he was focusing hard on something. Why do you reckon the dead are so small? Asked Maybelle. I guess because they don't have their bodies to weigh them down. Ava read carefully. What do you think, Mr. Wagner? Do memories weigh people down too? Wagner's eyes met Caroline's over Ava's head. Sometimes, he said softly, but sometimes they lift us up, help us find our way back to where we belong. Ava nodded sagely. Like the butterflies in my picture. Exactly like that. Later, after Ava had gone to do her homework, Caroline returned to check on Wagner. He held up the drawing as she entered. She's extraordinary, he said quietly. Yes, she is. How old is she? Caroline's fingers stilled mid-snap. 7. Wagner was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the drawing. 7 years, he said finally. Plus pregnancy. That would be almost 8 years ago. His eyes met hers, sharp with understanding. 12 years ago minus 4. Wagner, I remember everything about that summer, he said, his voice gaining strength. Every moment, every laugh, every touch. His hand moved to his scar automatically. I remember the last time I saw you. August 15th, The way you kissed me goodbye, said you'd see me tomorrow. Caroline's heart pounded. So you never came back. They found me that night, said they'd hurt you if I didn't disappear. His face hardened with old pain. I thought I was protecting you, but I didn't know. You couldn't have known, she whispered. I didn't know myself until a month later. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ava, he breathed. She's mine. Before Caroline could respond, a small gasp came from the doorway. They turned to find Ava standing there, her book clutched to her chest, her honey-colored eyes wide with comprehension. That's why you have the same crinkly eyes when you smile, she said softly. That's why your laugh sounds like the one in my dreams. The world seemed to hold its breath as father and daughter looked at each other, really looked, for the first time. And in that moment, Caroline saw what everyone else must have seen all along, the same gentle strength, the same quiet wisdom, the same heart that understood things others missed. I drew you finding your way back to us, Ava said, moving to the bed. And you did. Wagner reached for her with a trembling hand, and Ava took it without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. I did, he whispered, tears tracking down his face. I finally did. The days that followed the revelation were filled with a delicate dance of emotions, as three people who had been strangers just months ago learned to be a family. Wagner's recovery accelerated, driven by a determination that seemed to grow stronger every time Ava smiled at him. Steady now, Caroline instructed, supporting Wagner as he took his first steps across the room. His hands gripped the parallel bars installed by the physical therapist, but his eyes were fixed on Ava, who stood at the other end with an encouraging grin. You can do it, Ava called, bouncing slightly on her toes. Just like in my picture. Follow the butterflies. Wagner's face softened with that new expression Caroline was coming to recognize, the look of a father seeing his child's light for the first time. His steps grew more confident as he moved forward. I've been practicing my reading, Ava continued, chattering to distract him from the effort. So when you're stronger, we can take turns. You can read the dad parts, and I'll read the kid parts. Wagner's hands tightened on the bars, emotion flickering across his face. I'd like that, he managed, taking another step. Caroline's fingers snapped unconsciously as she monitored his progress, noting his improving balance and coordination. But her professional assessment couldn't quiet the thunder of her heart as she watched father and daughter gradually closing the distance between them. Remember to breathe, she reminded him softly. He glanced at her, a hint of his old humor sparking in his eyes. Which time? The question carried layers of meaning that made her chest tight. Which time indeed, during physical therapy, or during these moments when the weight of lost years pressed down on all of them? Both, she answered simply. When Wagner finally reached the end of the bars, Ava threw her arms around his waist, careful not to unbalance him but unable to contain her joy. His hand shook slightly as he stroked her curly hair. Well done, Mr. Wagner. Diana appeared in the doorway, her usual professional demeanor softened by the scene before her. The doctors will be very pleased with your progress. Just Wagner, he corrected gently, still looking at Ava. Mr. Wagner sounds too formal for family. Diana's eyes met Caroline's over his head, a silent message passing between them. Speaking of family, the estate manager said carefully, there are some matters we should discuss. When you're feeling stronger, of course. Wagner's face tightened almost imperceptibly. The photographs you mentioned. Among other things. Diana's tone was diplomatic but firm. Your life as Wagner Collins comes with certain responsibilities. Ones we'll need to address soon. Caroline helped Wagner back to his chair, noting the tension in his shoulders. That's enough physical therapy for now, she said professionally. You should rest before lunch. Can I eat with you today? Ava asked eagerly. I can tell you about my science project. We're learning about DNA and how kids get stuff from their parents, like eye color and... Ava, Caroline interrupted gently, seeing Wagner's expression. Remember what we talked about. Small steps. Ava's face fell slightly, but she nodded with surprising maturity. Right. Small steps, like when you're learning to walk again. But maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow, Wagner agreed, his voice rough with emotion. I promise. After Ava had gone to do her homework, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Diana lingered by the window, while Caroline busied herself checking Wagner's vital signs. I need to know, Wagner said finally, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. About that night, about why they made me leave. Diana turned from the window. Perhaps this isn't the best time. It's exactly the time. Wagner's hand moved to his scar, a gesture Caroline had come to recognize as a sign of deep emotion. I lost 12 years with my daughter because someone threatened the woman I loved. I need to know why. Caroline's fingers stilled mid-snap. It was the first time he'd spoken so directly about their past, about his feelings. Diana sighed heavily. Very well, but not today. You need to rest. Build your strength. Tomorrow, I'll bring the files. Everything I've gathered over the years about your disappearance. After Diana left, Caroline moved to check Wagner's IV line, maintaining her professional distance despite the charged atmosphere. Caroline, he said softly, look at me. Please. She met his eyes reluctantly, seeing in them all the questions she wasn't ready to answer. She's perfect, he whispered. Absolutely perfect. How did you do it? How did you raise her alone, not knowing where I was or why I'd gone? One day at a time, Caroline answered, her voice barely audible. And she made it easy. She's so much like you. Sees the world in a way that makes everything feel possible. Wagner caught her hand, his grip stronger than it had been even that morning. I never stopped looking for you. When I couldn't find Cora, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. Some perfect summer I'd imagined. We were both using fake names, Caroline reminded him gently, both running from something. Yes, his expression darkened. But my past caught up with me. And now, he gestured to the room, to the medical equipment, to the life he'd built as Wagner Collins. Now it's all tangled together, past and present, lies and truth. Papa? They turned to find Ava in the doorway again, clutching a fresh drawing. Wagner's hand tightened on Caroline's at the title Ava had used for the first time. Is it okay if I call you that? Ava asked hesitantly. I know we're doing small steps, but in my head that's who you are. Come here, Wagner said, his voice thick with emotion. Ava approached the chair, holding out her drawing. This one showed 3 figures having a picnic under a tree, butterflies dancing around them in joyful swirls. It's us, she explained. When you're stronger, maybe we can have a real picnic. I've never had a papa before, but I think that's the kind of thing families do. Wagner pulled her close with his free arm, still holding Caroline's hand with the other. Yes, he whispered into Ava's curls. That's exactly the kind of thing families do. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes as she watched them together, seeing in their matching profiles and gentle spirits all the years they'd lost, and all the moments they still had to share. Small steps, she reminded them softly, but she didn't pull her hand away. Outside the window, spring sunlight painted the garden in shades of new growth and possibility. Somewhere in the house, Diana was gathering files that would explain the past. But for now, in this moment, 3 people who had been separated by time and circumstance were learning how to be whole again. And if there were still secrets to be revealed, still truths to be faced, still steps to be taken on the path to healing, well, they would face them together, following Ava's butterflies toward whatever future awaited them. The manila folder sat between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. Diana had placed it on Wagner's bedside table that morning, her expression grave as she'd said, "Everything I could find is in here. Take your time." Now, as evening approached and Ava was occupied with homework, Caroline sat beside Wagner's bed, her fingers snapping with nervous energy as he opened the folder. "You don't have to do this now," she said softly. "You're still recovering." Wagner's hands were steady as he removed the first document. 12 years, Caroline, 12 years of secrets between us. I need to know why. The first page was a newspaper clipping from 2012. Collins' heir disappears after father's death. Wagner's jaw tightened as he read. My father, he said quietly, was not the man people thought he was. Caroline leaned forward, reading over his shoulder. The article painted a picture of a prominent business family thrown into chaos when the patriarch, Robert Collins, died unexpectedly, and his son vanished days later. The official story was that I was grieving, couldn't handle the pressure of taking over the family business. Wagner's hand moved to his scar, a gesture Caroline now recognized as self-soothing. The truth was, I found something, documents, proof of what my father had been doing. He pulled out more papers, bank statements, coded correspondence, photographs. Their pattern emerged. Decades of money laundering, connections to organized crime, a web of corruption hidden behind the respectable facade of Collins Enterprises. I was going to expose it all, Wagner continued, his voice tight with old pain. Had the evidence ready, was planning to take it to the FBI, then they came to the Blue Room that night. Caroline's heart stopped. The men who made you leave, my father's old partners. They showed me pictures of you, of the apartment where you lived, of your nursing school. Said if I didn't disappear, if I didn't bury the evidence and take over the business legitimately, they'd make sure you disappeared instead. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a photo. Caroline gasped softly. It showed her 12 years ago, walking out of her nursing school, unaware she was being watched, unaware she was carrying Wagner's child. I couldn't risk them hurting you, he said, looking at her with anguish in his eyes. So I ran, changed my name back to Wagner Collins, came home, played the prodigal son returning to take up his duties, spent the next 5 years slowly, carefully, dismantling my father's criminal empire from the inside. And the partners, most are in prison now, though they don't know I was behind their downfall. Some died of old age. The last one, his voice hardened. So the last one was in the car with me the night of my accident. He'd finally figured out what I'd done, was threatening to expose everything. We struggled for control of the wheel. Caroline's fingers stilled as understanding dawned. It wasn't just an accident. No, Wagner's hand found hers, gripping it like a lifeline. But he didn't survive, and all evidence of the struggle was destroyed in the crash. The official report calls it a tragic accident, the last of the Collins family's old guard, dying with the heir who'd reformed the company. Papa? Ava's voice from the doorway made them both turn. She stood there in her pajamas, clutching a new drawing. I had a dream about butterflies again. They were fighting through a storm, but they were together, so they were strong. Wagner quickly covered the photographs with a blanket as Ava approached. How that sounds like a special dream, sweetheart. Uh-huh, I drew it for you. She handed him the paper, then looked between him and Caroline with serious eyes. Are you telling Mama about the sad things, the ones that kept you away? Caroline's heart clenched at her daughter's intuition. Baby, grown-up things are complicated sometimes. I know, Ava interrupted with surprising maturity. Like in my books, when the hero has to go away to protect people. But they always come back when it's safe. She touched Wagner's scar gently. You came back when it was safe. Wagner's eyes filled with tears as he pulled Ava close. Yes, I did, and I'm never leaving again. Over Ava's head, his gaze met Caroline's, full of questions and promises and regret. She saw in his eyes the weight of years spent looking over his shoulder, dismantling his father's evil piece by piece, all while carrying the pain of leaving her behind. Why can I sleep in here tonight? Ava asked suddenly. Just for a little while. I want to make sure the sad things don't make you go away again. Caroline started to protest, but Wagner squeezed her hand. Just for a little while, he agreed softly. As Ava curled up in the oversized chair, Caroline helped Wagner put away the documents. They would need to finish this conversation, to unpack all the years of secrets and sacrifices, but not now. Not with their daughter watching over them with wise eyes that saw too much. I'll tell you a story, Wagner said to Ava, his voice growing stronger with each word, about a man who had to leave behind everything he loved to keep it safe, and about how love was stronger than fear, stronger than time, stronger than all the darkness in the world. Did he find his way back? Ava asked sleepily. He did. Wagner's eyes met Caroline's again. Joyce, and when he did, he found something even more precious than what he'd left. He found a family. Caroline busied herself checking his vital signs, using the familiar routine to steady her shaking hands. So many pieces were falling into place. Why he'd left, why he'd never tried to contact her, why he'd spent years dismantling his father's criminal empire piece by careful piece. Your readings are good, she said professionally, but her touch lingered on his wrist. The doctors will be pleased with your recovery. Caroline, he said softly, catching her hand, I know it's not enough. Knowing why I left doesn't make up for the years we lost. But I need you to understand, everything I did, every choice I made, was to keep you safe. I just never knew you were protecting her too, Caroline finished, looking at Ava, now sleeping peacefully in the chair. I understand, but Wagner, you're not alone anymore. Whatever comes next, whatever's left to face, we face it together. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that held 12 years of longing. Together, he agreed. Outside, the spring night deepened into velvet darkness, but in Wagner's room the shadows held no more power. The truth was out, painful and complex, but cleansing too, like rain washing away years of dust and doubt. And in her chair, Ava smiled in her sleep. dreaming of butterflies dancing through storms, growing stronger with each beat of their wings, just like the love that had brought her family back together against all odds. Spring had fully blossomed in the garden, painting the world in vibrant colors that matched the growing warmth inside the house. Wagner's recovery had progressed remarkably. He now walked with only minimal assistance, his strength returning more each day. This morning, Caroline found him already awake and dressed, standing by the window of his room. He wore proper clothes now instead of hospital garments, dark slacks, and a crisp blue button-down that made his eyes seem brighter. "You shouldn't be up without supervision," she said professionally, though her heart skipped at how much like himself he looked. Wagner turned, adjusting his collar in that nervous gesture she remembered from years ago. "I have something to ask you. Both of you, actually." Caroline's fingers snapped as she checked his vital signs out of habit. "Ava's getting ready for school." "I know. I heard her singing in the shower." His face softened with the joy of learning these small details about his daughter. "But before she goes, I want to show you something." He led her to his desk, where architectural drawings were spread out. Caroline recognized the house's layout, but with modifications. The guest suite expanded, a new children's bedroom added, a family room where medical equipment currently stood. "Diana helped me plan it," he said quietly. If you both want to stay, not as nurse and patient, but as family." Caroline's hand froze mid-snap. "Wagner, I know it's fast," he continued quickly. "I know we have years of history to work through, trust to rebuild, but Ava deserves a real home, with both her parents, and you," his voice roughened. "You deserve everything I couldn't give you 12 years ago." "Papa!" Ava's voice interrupted them as she bounced into the room, her school uniform neat, but her hair still seeking escape from its bows. "You're up early. Can you help me with my hair? Mama says you used to be good at braiding." Wagner's eyes met Caroline's, surprised and touched that she'd shared such details with their daughter. "I might be a little rusty," he said, holding out his hand to Ava, "but I'd love to try." Caroline watched as Wagner carefully seated Ava in front of him, his hands steady as he sectioned her curls. There was such tenderness in the way he worked, such concentration in making each strand perfect. "Are those house pictures?" Ava asked, spotting the drawings. "Like for when we live here for real?" Wagner's hands stilled momentarily. "Would you like that? Living here?" "Uh-huh. My friend Lily lives with both her parents, and they do stuff like make pancakes on Sundays and have movie nights. Could we do that too?" "We could do all of that and more," Wagner said softly, resuming his braiding. "If your mother agrees." Caroline moved to the window, watching spring sunlight dance across the garden. The practical part of her brain listed all the reasons to be cautious. They barely knew each other anymore. There were still unresolved issues. It was too soon, but her heart... "Mama?" Ava's voice was hesitant. "Are you mad?" "No, baby." Caroline turned back to them, taking in the sight of father and daughter together, so natural despite their years apart. "Just thinking about the sad things," Ava asked, because Papa explained about those, how sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things to protect people they love. "When did he explain this?" Caroline asked, surprised. "Last night, when you were doing your paperwork, we had a special talk." Ava beamed as Wagner finished her second braid. "He said sometimes love has to wait, but that doesn't make it less real. Like how caterpillars have to wait in their chrysalis before they can be butterflies." Wagner's eyes met Caroline's over their daughter's head, full of hope and uncertainty and love that had never really died. "She's right," he said quietly. "Love waits. But we've waited long enough, haven't we?" Before Caroline could respond, Diana appeared in the doorway. "Ava, sweetheart, the bus is here." After hugs and promises to continue the conversation later, Ava hurried off to school. Diana lingered, looking between Wagner and Caroline with knowing eyes. "The contractors can start next week," she said casually. "If all parties agree." Wagner moved to stand beside Caroline at the window. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "Not just about the house, but about everything." Caroline watched a pair of butterflies dance past the window, their wings catching the morning light. "You know what I've learned from watching you these past months? That healing isn't just about physical recovery. It's about finding your way back to yourself, your true self. And have I?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Found my true self." She turned to face him, really looking at the man he'd become. The boyish charm of Jack was still there, but tempered now with wisdom, with strength earned through years of silent battles. His eyes held the same love she remembered, but deeper, richer, tested by time and sacrifice. I think you never lost him, she said. You just had to protect him for a while, like you protected us. Wagner's hand moved to his scar, not in anxiety this time, but in remembrance. So that summer, when I was pretending to be Jack, was the only time I felt real. With you, I wasn't the Collins heir or the prodigal son. I was just me. And now I'm someone else entirely. He gestured to the house plans. Someone who wants to build something true, something lasting. Not just rooms and walls, but a home, a life, a family. Caroline's fingers started their nervous snapping, but Wagner caught them gently. We can take it slow, he said. Do it right this time. No more secrets. No more running. And your father's old partners, the ones still alive, all in prison now, thanks to evidence I spent years gathering. The last one died in the crash with me. We're safe. His voice roughened. I made sure of that before I even considered asking you to stay. Diana cleared her throat from the doorway. The physical therapist is here. Should I tell her you'll need a few minutes? Caroline straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. No, we're finished. Mr. Collins needs his therapy. Caroline, Wagner caught her hand. We're not finished. We're just beginning. Again, she squeezed his hand once before letting go. Tonight, she promised, after Ava's in bed, we'll talk about everything. Everything, he agreed. As Caroline left the room, she heard Diana speaking softly to Wagner about contractor schedules and renovation timelines. Such practical details for such an impractical thing. Love rekindled after 12 years. Family found in the aftermath of secrets and sacrifice. But maybe that was the point. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Maybe it was about building something real, brick by brick, truth by truth, until you had a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. And maybe, just maybe, their foundation had been there all along, waiting like a butterfly in its chrysalis, growing stronger in the darkness until it was ready to emerge in the light. 2 months later, on a perfect summer evening, Caroline stood in the garden watching Ava chase butterflies through beds of blooming flowers. The renovations were nearly complete, transforming the old house into a true family home while preserving its dignified charm. Her fingers snapped absently as she counted the changes. New furniture in the family room, Ava's bedroom decorated with butterflies and books, the medical equipment long gone. But the biggest change wasn't in the building, it was in the people who now called it home. Penny, for your thoughts. Wagner's voice came from behind her, strong and clear, no longer carrying any trace of his long sleep. His recovery had been remarkable, exceeding every doctor's expectations. Just thinking about time, she said, leaning back as his arms slipped around her waist. How it changes things, how it doesn't. Deep thoughts for a Friday evening? He teased, but his hold tightened slightly. They both knew what she meant. Today marked exactly 12 years since that summer night when everything had changed. Papa, Ava called, running toward them with something cupped in her hands. Look what I found. Wagner knelt to his daughter's level, now steady on his legs after weeks of intensive therapy. What treasure did you discover? Ava opened her hands carefully to reveal a butterfly, its wings a brilliant blue. It was stuck in a spider web, but I helped it get free. Can we keep it? You know what they say about butterflies, sweetheart, Caroline said gently. If you love something, set it free. Ava finished, her face serious. Because love means wanting what's best, even if it's hard. Wagner's eyes met Caroline's over their daughter's head, both remembering other lessons about love and freedom and difficult choices. That's right, he said softly. But you know what else they say about love? What? Sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes back to you. Ava considered this as she opened her hands. The butterfly lingered for a moment on her palm before taking flight, circling the three of them once before soaring toward the evening sky. Like you came back to us, Ava said with the simple wisdom of children. Because love waited. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes as Wagner pulled them both into his embrace. So much had changed since that long-ago summer, but the essential truth remained. Love, real love, could survive anything. Time, distance, secrets, even fear. I have something for both of you, Wagner said, reaching into his pocket. I've been waiting for the right moment. He produced 2 small boxes, one wrapped in butterfly paper, the other in simple blue silk. Ava bounced excitedly as she opened hers, gasping at the delicate butterfly pendant inside. It's beautiful, she exclaimed, holding it up to catch the light. Can I wear it to school? Of course, Wagner smiled, helping her with the clasp. It's to remind you that even when things change, some things stay the same, like how much your parents love you. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she opened her box. Inside lay a ring, elegant and understated, with a small butterfly engraved beside a perfect diamond. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," Wagner said quietly. "We can take all the time you need, but I want you to know that this time, I'm not going anywhere. This time, I'm exactly who I say I am, and I love you exactly as I am." "Look, Mama," Ava pointed excitedly at the garden. The butterfly came back. Sure enough, the blue butterfly had returned, landing on a flower near them. Caroline watched it, remembering another summer night, another moment of perfect clarity when she'd known exactly what her heart wanted. "You know," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger, "sometimes you don't need time to know what's right." Wagner's breath caught. "Is that a yes?" "It's a welcome home," she smiled, reaching up to touch his scar, no longer a reminder of secrets kept, but of truth revealed. Finally, it's a happy ending," Ava declared, hugging them both. "Like in my books." "No, baby," Caroline corrected gently, looking at the family they'd become. "It's a happy beginning." Later that night, after Ava was asleep in her new butterfly-themed room, Caroline and Wagner stood in the garden under a star-filled sky. Music drifted softly from the house. Their song, "Dream a Little Dream of Me." "May I have this dance?" Wagner asked, holding out his hand just as he had 12 years ago in a Miami beach bar. Caroline took it, letting him pull her close as they swayed to the familiar melody. "You know what Ava said this morning? She said she doesn't need to draw pictures of us finding each other anymore because we're already found." "Wise beyond her years," Wagner murmured into her hair, "just like her mother, just like her father," Caroline countered, feeling his smile against her temple. They danced in comfortable silence, letting the music and memories wash over them. So much had changed. They were different people now, shaped by time and choice and consequence. But their hearts still beat the same rhythm, still recognized each other across all the years and miles. "I love you," Wagner said simply, not as Jack loving Cora or Wagner Collins loving Caroline Hayes, just me loving you, exactly as we are. Caroline lifted her face to his, seeing in his eyes all the summers past and all the summers yet to come. "I love you too. All of you, past, present and future." Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, carrying the weight of 12 years of waiting and the lightness of countless moments yet to be shared. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, while somewhere in the garden, a blue butterfly settled on a flower, finally home. And in her room, Ava slept peacefully, her new pendant catching moonlight on her bedside table, her latest drawing showing 3 figures not searching anymore, not waiting, not hoping, just being together, surrounded by butterflies, exactly where they were always meant to be. The end. 1 year later, the summer breeze carried the sound of laughter through the garden, now transformed into a butterfly sanctuary that Ava proudly called her outdoor classroom. 8-year-old Ava stood before a small group of children, confidently explaining the life cycle of monarch butterflies while her parents watched from the porch. "And did you know," Ava's voice rang clear with enthusiasm, "that butterflies remember things from when they were caterpillars? Just like how love remembers, even when it has to change and grow." Caroline's fingers entwined with Wagner's, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. They'd married in this same garden in spring, a small ceremony where Ava had served as both flower girl and self-proclaimed chief butterfly expert. The Collins Foundation, once associated with Wagner's father's darker legacy, had been completely transformed. Now it funded children's education programs and environmental conservation efforts, with a special focus on butterfly habitats. Ava's school class was the first of many groups to visit their garden-turned-learning center. "Time for snacks," Diana called from the doorway, still managing the household with precision, but now with the warmth of a family member rather than just an employee. As the children rushed inside, Ava lingered to release a newly emerged butterfly from the chrysalis habitat she monitored daily. The creature took flight, its wings catching the light as it soared upward. "Sometimes the best stories," Wagner said softly, pulling Caroline closer, "are the ones that take time to find their ending, or their beginning," Caroline replied, watching their daughter chase after her friends, her butterfly pendant glinting in the sun. Above them, butterflies danced in the summer air, their delicate wings painting patterns of hope against the endless blue sky. If you had to wait 12 years to meet the great love of your life again, would you hold out hope even if you didn't know why they left you? What if you found out that all this time your love had been fighting in the shadows to protect you, even if it meant giving up your own happiness and meeting the daughter you didn't even know existed? Wagner and Caroline show us that sometimes love needs to wait in the dark, like a butterfly in its chrysalis, until it's safe to fly again. And do you believe that there are loves like this, capable of surviving time and the most difficult circumstances? Millionaire loses his wife and her baby. Now he desperately hires her to breastfeed his child. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew that answering that call would change everything, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Melissa Renee Clark stared at her cracked iPhone 8 screen, watching the notification from Venmo pop up. Rent payment overdue, $847. The golden highlights in her elegant braids caught the fluorescent light of the Brewhaven coffee shop as she wiped down the same counter for the third time that morning. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright with sarcasm, looked tired today. "Another double shot Americano," she called out, forcing energy into her voice that she didn't feel. The customer, a woman in yoga pants scrolling through Instagram, barely looked up as she grabbed her drink. Melissa watched her walk away, probably heading to some perfect suburban life that existed only in social media posts. The bell above the door chimed, and Melissa's shoulders automatically straightened. Keep smiling, keep working, keep surviving. That's what Dr. Martinez had told her during their last session. The sertralina from Walgreens was supposed to help with the fog in her head, but some mornings still felt like swimming through concrete. She opened her Dailyo app quickly, tapping the OK mood emoji. Not great, not terrible, just okay. That seemed to be her default setting these days. The morning rush had been brutal. Her manager, Derek, kept shooting her looks every time she moved a little slower than usual. Her Converse sneakers were already killing her feet, and it wasn't even noon. The medical bills sitting in her small Wicker Park apartment felt like they were calling her name, each one a reminder of everything she'd lost. Stop thinking about it, she told herself, the same mantra she'd been using for months. A text from her friend Janae popped up. "Girl, saw your ex at Whole Foods with some new chick. You dodging my calls again?" Melissa swiped the message away without responding. She wasn't ready for Janae's well-meaning pep talks about getting back out there, and healing takes time. Some wounds were too fresh for motivational quotes. The steam wand hissed as she prepared another latte, her silver bracelet, the one her mother had given her before she passed, catching on her uniform sleeve. She adjusted it carefully. It was one of the few beautiful things she had left. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deeper than the usual customer chatter, with an edge of desperation that made Melissa look up. A tall man stood at the counter, and what struck her first wasn't his perfectly styled brown hair or his expensive Banana Republic shirt. It was the way he held the baby. The infant was crying. Not the gentle fussing she'd heard from other customers, children, but the kind of desperate wailing that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The man's blue-gray eyes looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I'm sorry," he said, shifting the baby awkwardly. "I know this is unusual, but I really need help. His name is Anthony Gabriel, and this is my son, Brian." His voice cracked slightly on the word son. "I've tried everything. Formula, different bottles, the expensive Dr. Brown's ones everyone recommends. Nothing works." Melissa found herself walking around the counter before she realized what she was doing. The baby's cries seemed to echo in her chest, awakening something she'd been trying to bury for months. "How old is he?" she asked softly, her hands instinctively reaching toward the child. 6 months, Anthony replied, his relief visible as she gently took Brian. "His mother, she died during childbirth. I've been raising him alone, and I'm failing." The moment Brian settled against Melissa's chest, something shifted. His cries softened to whimpers, then to silence. Her body remembered what her mind was trying to forget. The weight of a baby, the trust, the need. Anthony stared at her with wonder. "How did you—" Melissa felt tears threatening to fall as she looked down at Brian's blue-gray eyes, so much like his father's. She knew she should hand him back, should return to her coffee counter and her safe, numb routine. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I think I can help you." But what she didn't tell him was that helping him might destroy the careful walls she'd built around her broken heart. 3 days later, Melissa stood outside a glass tower in downtown Chicago, questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The address Anthony had texted her on WhatsApp seemed impossible, the kind of building where people in $1,000 suits disappeared into elevators that probably cost more than her annual salary. She adjusted her gold hoop earrings nervously, smoothing down her best H&M blouse. Her reflection in the building's windows showed a woman trying too hard to look like she belonged. Apartment 4207, just tell security you're here for Brian Gabriel, his message had read, followed by a simple, thank you. Those 2 words had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. The security guard, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, smiled when she mentioned Brian's name. Oh, you must be the lady Mr. Gabriel's been waiting for. That baby's been keeping the whole floor up, he chuckled, handing her a visitor's badge. Elevator bank C, all the way up. As the elevator climbed, Melissa's phone buzzed with notifications she'd been ignoring. Janae had sent 17 messages since yesterday, ranging from concerned to annoyed. Her boss Derek had called twice about shift coverage. 3 different collection agencies had left voicemails that she'd deleted without listening to. But Brian's face kept floating in her mind, those blue-gray eyes that had looked at her with complete trust, the way his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers. Her body had responded to his need in a way that terrified and comforted her simultaneously. The elevator opened to a hallway that smelled like expensive candles and success. Apartment 4207 had double doors, actual double doors, like in the movies. Before she could knock, 1 door swung open. Anthony stood there in a wrinkled Patagonia sweatshirt, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older than his 34 years. Melissa, he breathed, relief flooding his voice. I was starting to think you'd changed your mind. Behind him, she could hear Brian crying, that same desperate wail from the coffee shop. The sound went straight through her like electricity. Sois, I almost did, she admitted, stepping inside. The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her car, but it felt cold, unlived in, like a magazine spread rather than a home. Anthony ran his hands through his disheveled hair. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since you left the shop. I've tried everything, different formulas, those expensive organic ones from Whole Foods, even called 3 different pediatricians. Nothing works. Brian's cries grew louder from what she assumed was the nursery. Without thinking, Melissa walked toward the sound, her practical nature taking over. Show me his routine, she said. The nursery was perfect, like everything else in Anthony's world appeared to be. Soft greys and whites, a crib that probably cost more than most people's rent, shelves lined with organic everything. But Brian lay in his Carter's onesie, red-faced and inconsolable, his tiny fists waving in frustration. Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar recognition. When did he last eat? An hour ago, maybe 2. Anthony's voice cracked with exhaustion. Time kind of blurs together when you're not sleeping. She picked up Brian gently, feeling that same immediate settling she'd experienced at the coffee shop. His cries softened to whimpers as she held him against her chest, swaying slightly. He's not hungry, she said softly. He's scared. Anthony stared at her. Scared. Babies can sense when the people caring for them are stressed, Melissa explained, her voice steadier than she felt. You're running on empty. He can feel that energy. It's making him anxious. The room fell quiet except for Brian's gradually calming breaths. Anthony sank into the expensive nursing chair, covering his face with his hands. I'm failing him, he whispered. Elena would have known what to do. She had all these books, took every class. I was supposed to be the provider. She was supposed to be... His voice broke. Melissa felt something crack open in her chest, not the careful numbness she'd cultivated, but something warmer and more dangerous. You're not failing him, she said quietly. You're just learning. Anthony looked up at her, his blue-gray eyes so similar to his son's. Will you help us? I know it's unusual, and I can pay whatever you need. My company just secured another round of funding, and How much? The practical question slipped out before she could stop it. Whatever you're making at the coffee shop, I'll triple it. Melissa's mind raced. Triple her salary would cover her medical bills, her rent, maybe even let her breathe for the first time in months. But holding Brian felt like walking through a minefield of memories she wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed with another notification, probably another overdue bill. She looked down at Brian, now peaceful in her arms, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. "I need to know something first," she said, meeting Anthony's desperate gaze. What happened to his mother really happened. The silence that followed told her she wasn't prepared for the truth she was about to hear. Anthony's hands trembled as he reached for the framed photo on Brian's dresser, and Melissa realized she wasn't ready for what he was about to reveal. "Elena was perfect," Anthony began, his voice barely above a whisper. The photo showed a beautiful Latina woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "We met at Northwestern. She was finishing her master's in education. I was drowning in my startup. She used to joke that I lived on energy drinks and impossible dreams." Melissa shifted Brian gently in her arms, feeling the weight of the story she was about to hear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched endlessly, but the apartment felt smaller somehow, filled with grief that hadn't been spoken aloud. "The pregnancy was perfect, too," Anthony continued, setting the photo down with careful precision. "Every appointment, every ultrasound. She did yoga, ate organic everything from that expensive place on North Avenue, read to him every night." His Apple Watch buzzed with a Slack notification, but he ignored it completely. She had this playlist on Spotify, classical music mixed with Spanish lullabies her grandmother used to sing. Brian made a soft sound against Melissa's chest, and she found herself swaying automatically, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Oh, what happened?" she asked gently, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Anthony walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. "Labor started normally. We went to Northwestern Memorial, the best hospital in the city." She was excited, texting her sister updates, posting on Instagram about finally meeting our little miracle. His voice cracked on the last words. Melissa felt her own chest tighten, memories threatening to surface that she'd worked so hard to bury. She focused on Brian's breathing, steady and trusting against her. 22 hours of labor, Anthony continued. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. Placental abruption. The doctors moved so fast, I barely understood what was happening. 1 minute Elena was squeezing my hand, laughing about how Brian was taking his time like his father. The next minute, alarms were going off and they were rushing her to surgery. The apartment felt heavy with silence, except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic below. "They saved Brian," Anthony said, turning from the window. His blue-gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But Elena, she hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop the bleeding. I held her hand as she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. She knew that kind of loss. Different circumstances, but the same hollow ache that followed you everywhere. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The worst part was coming home," Anthony continued, his voice stronger now, like he needed to get it all out. "The nursery was ready. The fridge was full of casseroles from Elena's friends, and I had this perfect baby who needed me to be perfect too. But I couldn't even figure out how to work the bottle warmer she'd registered for at Target." Brian stirred in Melissa's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed to fill the space between their pain. She looked down at his peaceful face. "Elena's son, Anthony's miracle, a child born from love and loss in equal measure. Elena's family blames me," Anthony said quietly. "Her mother won't return my calls. Her sister blocked me on Instagram after I posted a photo of Brian on his 3-month birthday. They think I should have done more, should have insisted on a C-section earlier, should have been a better advocate." "And you blame yourself too," Melissa said. "It wasn't a question." Anthony nodded, sinking into the expensive nursing chair that probably Eleanor had picked out, dreaming of rocking her son to sleep. "Every day, I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently. Maybe if I hadn't been checking my phone during contractions, maybe if I'd pushed the doctors harder when she said something felt wrong." Melissa understood that kind of guilt, the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys that could consume you if you let them. Her own loss had come with its own catalogue of self-blame. "Is that why you avoid social media?" she asked. "Just can't handle seeing other people's perfect families," Anthony admitted. "Elena used to love Instagram. She had this account where she posted about teaching and pregnancy. Her last post was a picture of the hospital bag, captioned, 'Ready to meet our little man.' It got 300 likes and dozens of comments about how excited everyone was." Brian chose that moment to open his eyes, looking up at Melissa with that serious expression babies get when they're taking in the world. She felt something shift inside her chest, not the careful numbness she'd maintained, but something warmer and more frightening. "He has her eyes," she said softly. So everyone says that, Anthony replied. But sometimes I look at him and I see her smile, or the way she used to scrunch her nose when she was thinking. Melissa's phone buzzed with another text from Janae. Girl, where are you? Derek's been calling about your shifts. Reality crashed back in. Her life outside these expensive walls, the bills waiting in her apartment, the job she couldn't afford to lose. Anthony, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. If I do this, if I help you with Brian, I need you to understand something about me, too. Melissa's words hung in the air like a confession she'd never planned to make, and Anthony could see the pain she'd been hiding behind her sarcastic smile. Brian had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with perfect trust. Melissa looked down at him, her dark brown eyes reflecting something Anthony hadn't seen before. Not just compassion, but recognition, the kind that comes from walking through your own version of hell. I lost a baby too, she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. 7 months ago. Anthony felt his breath catch. The way she'd held Brian so naturally, the immediate calm that seemed to radiate from her when she touched him, it all made terrible, beautiful sense now. His name was Marcus, Melissa continued, her gold hoop earrings catching the light as she shook her head slightly. He was born at 28 weeks, premature rupture of membranes, they called it. Medical terminology for your body failed when it mattered most. She shifted Brian gently, and Anthony noticed how her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet, she'd mentioned, seemed to give her strength as she touched it. He lived for 6 days, she whispered. 6 days in the NICU at University of Chicago Medical Center. Tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping constantly. I couldn't hold him properly because of all the equipment, but I could touch his tiny hand through the incubator. Anthony sank deeper into the nursing chair, Elena's chair, feeling the weight of shared grief settling between them. He understood now why Melissa had seemed to recognize something in Brian's cries, in his need. My husband couldn't handle it, Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger, like telling the story was pulling something out of her that needed to be released. Marcus dying, the medical bills, me falling apart. He filed for divorce while I was still getting bills from the funeral home, said he needed space to process and couldn't handle my depression. Jesus, Anthony breathed. The medical bills destroyed my credit, she said, a bitter laugh escaping. So even with insurance, the NICU stay cost more than most people make in 2 years. That's why I'm working at the coffee shop, why I take extra shifts, why my phone is constantly buzzing with collection calls I can't answer. Brian stirred slightly in her arms, and she automatically began that gentle swaying motion that seemed to come from muscle memory. After Marcus died, my body, she paused, searching for the right words. It didn't understand that he was gone. I was still producing milk for a baby who would never need it. The doctors gave me medication to stop it, but sometimes when I hold Brian, it's like my body remembers what it was made to do. Anthony felt tears threatening. Melissa, I had no idea. When I asked you to help, I didn't know. That's why I can help him, she interrupted gently. Brian needs what my body is still trying to give. And maybe, she looked down at the sleeping baby, maybe I need him too. The apartment felt different now, less like a showcase and more like a sanctuary where 2 broken people had found each other through an impossible circumstance. Is that why you stopped going to church? Anthony asked, remembering how she'd mentioned her faith at the coffee shop. Melissa nodded. Pastor Williams kept talking about God's plan, about how everything happens for a reason. I wanted to scream at him that there was no good reason for Marcus to die, no lesson worth learning from watching your child suffer. She paused. But sometimes, when I hold Brian, I hear the hymns in my head. Amazing grace, how great thou art. The songs my grandmother used to sing when I was scared. Anthony's phone buzzed with notifications he continued to ignore. His team at the startup probably wondering why he'd missed 3 meetings today. But sitting here, watching Melissa hold his son with such tender understanding, he realized he'd been approaching everything wrong. I've been trying to be perfect, he said quietly, for Brian, for Elena's memory. I thought if I could just figure out the right formula, the right schedule, the right everything, I could somehow make up for the fact that he doesn't have his mother. Babies don't need perfect, Melissa said, adjusting Brian's position with practiced ease. They need present. They need someone who shows up even when it's hard, even when you're scared you're doing it wrong. Her phone buzzed again. Derek from the coffee shop, probably wondering where she was. The real world existed outside Anthony's expensive windows, with its bills and obligations and people who didn't understand that sometimes healing requires taking risks that look insane from the outside. "If I do this," Melissa said, meeting Anthony's eyes, "I need some rules. I keep my apartment, my independence. This is about helping Brian, not about me becoming some live-in nanny from a romance novel." Anthony nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need. And I need you to understand that some days will be harder than others. Grief isn't linear, and neither is healing." "I understand," he said, though he wasn't sure he completely did. Brian chose that moment to wake up, his blue-gray eyes opening slowly, focusing on Melissa's face with that serious baby expression. He made a soft sound, not crying, just acknowledging her presence. "Hey there, little man," she whispered, and Anthony watched his son's face transform into something that might have been a smile. "I think," Melissa said softly, "we're all going to learn something from each other." But what none of them knew was that learning to trust again would test them in ways they never imagined. 2 weeks later, Melissa discovered that some routines save you, and others slowly break down the walls you've built around your heart. The alarm on her cracked iPhone 8 buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small Wicker Park apartment. Her Google Calendar showed today's schedule: Brian 8 a.m., 12 p.m., Brewhaven 2 p.m., 8 p.m. The new routine was exhausting, but for the first time in months, her Dialio app showed more green, good days than grey okay ones. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the WhatsApp messages from Anthony that had come in during the night. A photo of Brian at 3 a.m. with the caption, "Couldn't sleep, but look at this face." Another at 5:15 a.m. "He's asking for you, I think." And finally, "Thank you for yesterday, see you at 8. Those messages had become her favorite part of waking up, though she'd never admit it. Melissa pulled on her favorite jeans and a soft sweater from Target, checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her braids looked good. She'd gotten them redone at Janet's cousin's salon in Bronzeville last weekend, the blonde tips freshly touched up. Her gold hoops caught the morning light filtering through her small window. The 20-minute bus ride to Anthony's building had become a meditation of sorts. She'd put in her earbuds and listened to gospel music, Tasha Cobbs, Kirk Franklin, sometimes her grandmother's old Mahalia Jackson recordings. The music filled the spaces in her chest that had been empty for so long. "Morning, Miss Clark," the security guard, Robert, called out as she entered the lobby. "How's our little man doing?" "Growing like a weed," she replied, genuinely smiling. It still surprised her how easily the smiles came now. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor used to make her nervous. Now it felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. Anthony opened the door before she could knock, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a Northwestern University t-shirt and pajama pants. The casual version of him had become her favorite, less polished, more real. "He's been fussy since 5 a.m., Anthony said, stepping aside to let her in. "I tried everything, the swing, the white noise machine, even that playlist Elena made. Nothing worked." Melissa could hear Brian's cries from the nursery, but they didn't sound distressed anymore. They sounded like calls for her specifically. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, that familiar tightening in her chest that meant her milk was ready. "Good morning, sweet boy," she murmured, lifting Brian from his crib. He was wearing a Carter's onesie with little dinosaurs. Anthony's choice, she could tell. Elena probably would have picked something more sophisticated. The moment Brian felt her arms around him, his cries softened to whimpers, then to the contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Melissa settled into the nursing chair, the expensive one that had become hers by default, and began to feed him. Anthony lingered in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He loves you," he said quietly. "I love him too," she replied, surprised by how easily the words came. 3 months ago, she couldn't imagine loving anything again. Now this little boy had somehow crept past all her defenses. "Coffee?" Anthony asked, the question that had become their morning ritual. "Please." 2 sugars. Splash of oat milk. She heard him moving around the kitchen, the sound of the expensive espresso machine he'd bought but never learned to use properly. These small domestic moments had become precious to her. Proof that she could still be part of something, still be needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Girl, you've been glowing lately. What's his name?" Melissa smiled, typing back, "His name is Brian. He's 6 months old and he's teaching me how to be happy again." Janae's response was immediate. "Boy, you know what I mean, but I'm glad you're smiling. Bring him by the shop sometime." Anthony returned with 2 mugs, hers in a ceramic cup from some tech conference, his in a Northwestern mug that had seen better days. He'd learned to make her coffee exactly how she liked it, which felt more intimate than it should have. "I have to ask you something," he said, settling into the other chair in the nursery. "My company is hosting a small gathering next Friday. Nothing fancy, just dinner with some investors. But I was wondering if you and Brian might come with me." Melissa looked up from Brian, surprised, like a date. "Like—" Anthony ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as nervous energy. "Like I don't want to spend another evening making small talk about market projections when I could be home with the 2 people who matter most to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the morning light streaming through the nursery windows. Melissa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with Brian's feeding schedule. "Anthony," she said carefully, "we agreed this was about helping Brian. I'm not looking for anything complicated." "I know," he said quickly. "I know we did, but Melissa, these past 2 weeks, I haven't felt this alive since before Elena died. And I hope, that maybe you feel something too." Brian had finished eating and was now looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the weight of the conversation happening above his head. Melissa shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently while she gathered her thoughts. "I feel something," she admitted quietly, "but I'm scared. My last relationship ended with divorce papers and a broken heart. I don't know if I'm ready to risk that again." Anthony leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes earnest. "I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to consider that maybe we're both healing, and maybe we're healing together for a reason." Before Melissa could answer, Brian made a sound that seemed to say everything she couldn't find words for, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in something beautiful again. Friday night arrived faster than Melissa's courage could catch up, and she found herself standing in front of her closet mirror, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The black dress from H&M hung perfectly on her curves, the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a work Christmas party she'd ended up skipping. Her braids were pulled back into an elegant low bun, the blonde tips creating a subtle halo effect. She'd borrowed Janet's good jewelry, delicate gold earrings and a matching necklace that made her feel like someone who belonged in Anthony's world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Car's downstairs whenever you're ready." Brian's being an angel in his tiny suit. She smiled despite her nerves. Anthony had insisted on getting Brian a miniature navy blazer from Baby Gap, claiming his son needed to look investor-ready. The image of 6-month-old Brian in formal wear had been melting her heart all week. Another message popped up, this one from Janet. "Girl, send pics. And remember, you deserve good things." Melissa stared at her reflection one more time. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the one who'd been surviving on sarcasm and sertralina just a month ago. This woman looked hopeful. It was terrifying. The ride to the restaurant in Anthony's Tesla Model Y felt like floating. Brian sat in his car seat between them, babbling happily and grabbing at everything within reach. He'd grown so much in their weeks together, more alert, more responsive, more trusting. When he looked at her now, his blue-gray eyes lit up with recognition that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. "Nervous?" Anthony asked, his hand briefly touching hers as he adjusted the car's climate control. "Terrified," she admitted. "I've never been to a business dinner. What if I say something wrong? What if they ask about my job at the coffee shop and realize I don't belong here?" Anthony pulled into the valet area of Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. The building looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel and impossibly elegant people walking through its doors. "Melissa," Anthony said, turning to face her fully, "you're brilliant. You're raising my son like he's your own, and you make me laugh every single day. If they can't see how incredible you are, that's their problem, not yours." The valet opened her door before she could respond, and suddenly she was stepping onto Michigan Avenue in borrowed jewelry and her best dress, holding a baby who trusted her completely, while the man she was falling for introduced her to his world. The private dining room was intimidating. 12 people in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent, talking about market disruption and sustainable energy solutions. Anthony's hand found the small of her back as he guided her around the room, introducing her simply as Melissa, who's been helping with Brian. She noticed he didn't say babysitter or nanny, just Melissa, like she mattered. Brian was a hit, charming everyone with his serious expressions and occasional baby babble. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, spent 20 minutes talking to Melissa about child development, while Brian sat contentedly in her lap. "He's lucky to have you," the woman said. "You can tell he feels secure. That doesn't happen by accident." Melissa felt something warm bloom in her chest. For so long, she'd defined herself by her failures. The baby she couldn't save, the marriage she couldn't hold together, the bills she couldn't pay. But here, holding Brian while intelligent people discussed changing the world, she felt capable again. The dinner conversation flowed between renewable energy patents and funding rounds, topics that should have made her feel out of place. Instead, she found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about Anthony's work that she'd never thought to ask before. "So your company designs solar panels for urban environments?" she asked during dessert. "Solar collection systems integrated into building materials," Anthony explained, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he talked about something he loved. "The idea is to make every surface energy productive without changing the aesthetic of the building, like the windows could generate power." "Exactly," he smiled at her in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Eleanor used to say I talked about it too much, but you actually seem interested." The comment slipped out without thought, and Melissa saw Anthony's face change slightly. Not sadness, exactly, but recognition of how different this was from what he'd had before. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront, Brian sleeping peacefully in his stroller. The Chicago skyline glittered across the water, and Melissa felt like she was living someone else's life, the kind of life she'd seen in movies, but never imagined for herself. "Thank you," Anthony said as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Tonight felt normal, like we were a family going to dinner together. "We're not a family," Melissa said automatically, the words sharper than she'd intended. Anthony was quiet for a moment, watching the waves lap against the shore. "What are we then?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so peacefully in his tiny blazer, his little fist curled around her finger even in sleep. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I love him. I know being with both of you makes me feel like myself again, the version of myself I was before everything fell apart. And I know," Anthony said quietly, "that when I picture Brian's future, you're in it. When I think about coming home from work, I imagine both of you there. When I think about bedtime stories and first steps and birthday parties, I can't imagine them without you." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something broken starts to heal. "Anthony, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real for me. You're not just helping with Brian, you're helping me remember what it feels like to hope for something." Brian stirred in his stroller, making soft baby sounds without waking up. The sound made them both smile, this tiny person who had brought them together in the most unexpected way. "I need to tell you something," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to hope for something too, and that scares me more than anything." But what scared her even more was the realization that she might already be too deep to turn back now. 3 weeks after the dinner, Melissa thought she had everything under control, until one exhausting Tuesday morning, when everything she'd carefully balanced came crashing down. The day started wrong from the moment her alarm failed to go off. Her iPhone 8's battery had died overnight, and she woke up at 7:45 a.m. to Derek from Brew Haven pounding on her apartment door. "Melissa, you were supposed to open this morning." His voice carried through the thin walls of her Wicker Park building. "We've got a line of customers and no one to work the espresso machine." She stumbled to the door in her pajamas, her braids messy from sleep. "Derek, I'm so sorry. My phone died, and I have to be at Anthony's in 15 minutes. Brian has his pediatrician appointment." "I don't care about your babysitting gig," Derek snapped, his face red with frustration. "You work for me, remember? The coffee shop that actually pays your salary." Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. She'd been juggling both jobs for weeks, but lately her heart had been more invested in Brian's schedule than her shifts at Brew Haven. The realization hit her like cold water. She was in danger of losing the job that kept her independent. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, already reaching for her clothes. "I'll call Anthony and explain." But when she tried calling Anthony's number, it went straight to voicemail. He was probably already in his morning meeting with potential investors from California, the big presentation he'd been preparing for all week. She fired off a quick WhatsApp message. "Emergency at work. Running 2 hours late. So sorry. Brian's appointment is at 11. Can you handle it?" The response came back immediately. "Mel, I can't. This meeting determines our next funding round. I need you. Her hands shook as she pulled on her Converse and grabbed her keys. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being caught between two worlds, failing at both. The morning at Brew Haven was brutal. Derek made pointed comments about reliability and commitment, while she worked through the breakfast rush with a fake smile. Her regular customers noticed her distraction, and she spilled a latte on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for her usual decaf with extra foam. "I'm so sorry," Melissa said, grabbing paper towels while Mrs. Patterson shook coffee off her coat. "Honey, you seem stressed," the older woman said kindly. "Everything all right?" Melissa felt tears threatening, just trying to keep all the pieces together. By 10:30 a.m., she was finally free to leave for Anthony's apartment. She caught the first bus to downtown, checking her phone obsessively. 3 missed calls from Anthony, 2 voicemails she didn't have time to listen to, and a series of increasingly frantic WhatsApp messages. "Mel, where are you? Brian's been crying for an hour. I tried the bottle, but he won't take it. The investors moved the meeting to 1 p.m. Please tell me you're close. I don't know what to do. He needs you." The last message made her heart break a little. Anthony, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and revolutionize sustainable energy, was helpless when it came to his own son's basic needs. She arrived at his building at 11:15 a.m., her hair escaping from its ponytail, her Brew Haven uniform stained with coffee and stress sweat. Robert, the security guard, took one look at her and fast-tracked her to the elevator. "Rough morning, Miss Clark?" "You could say that," she replied, trying to catch her breath. She could hear Brian crying before Anthony even opened the door. When he did, she saw a man at the end of his rope, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his blue-gray eyes. "Thank God," he breathed, stepping aside to let her in. I was starting to panic. The pediatrician's office called twice asking if we were still coming. Brian was in his bouncy seat in the living room, his face red from crying, his little fists waving in frustration. The moment he saw Melissa, his cries changed pitch, less distressed, more demanding, like he was scolding her for being late. "I know, baby," she murmured, scooping him up. "Mama's here now." The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Mama, not Melissa's here or I'm here. Mama." Anthony heard it too. She could tell by the way he went very still, watching her settle Brian against her chest. "Oh, Mel," he said quietly. "Did you just—" "I didn't mean to say that," she said quickly, feeling heat creep up her neck. "It just slipped out. I know I'm not his mother." But even as she said it, Brian was already calming in her arms, making those contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Her body responded automatically, that familiar tightening that meant she was ready to feed him, to comfort him, to be everything he needed. "Thought maybe we should cancel the appointment," Anthony said, checking his watch. "Reschedule for when we're both less stressed." "No," Melissa said firmly. "Brian needs his checkup. I can take him." "By yourself?" The question hung in the air between them. Taking Brian to the pediatrician alone felt like crossing a line they hadn't discussed. It felt like being his parent, not just his caregiver. "I've been to every appointment with him for the past month," she pointed out. "I know his feeding schedule, his sleep patterns, when he last had a diaper change. I probably know his routine better than you do right now." Anthony looked like he wanted to argue, but his phone buzzed with another call from his office. "The investors just landed at O'Hare," he said, checking the screen. "If I don't nail this presentation—" "Go," Melissa said. "Brian and I will handle the appointment. I'll text you updates." She could see the internal struggle on Anthony's face, the need to be present for his son versus the pressure to save his company. Finally, he grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the couch. "His insurance card is in the diaper bag," he said, moving into business mode. "The pediatrician is Dr. Sarah Chen at Northwestern Memorial. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately." "Anthony," Melissa said, shifting Brian to one arm so she could touch his shoulder. "I've got this. Trust me." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd become so integral to his life that he couldn't imagine navigating parenthood without her. "I do trust you," he said finally, "more than anyone." An hour later, sitting in Dr. Chen's office while Brian charmed the nurses with his serious expressions and occasional smiles, Melissa realized something had shifted. When the doctor asked about Brian's home life, she found herself answering naturally. "He's sleeping through the night now, eating well, very social. His dad is a wonderful father, very attentive." "And you're—" Dr. Chen asked, making notes on her tablet. Melissa hesitated for just a moment. I helped take care of him. But in her heart, she knew she was more than that. She was the person Brian looked for when he woke up. She was the one who knew he preferred to be burped on the left shoulder, that he liked to have his feet tickled during diaper changes, that he calmed down fastest when she hummed old gospel songs. Walking out of the doctor's office with a perfectly healthy Brian in her arms, Melissa realized she had stopped thinking about when this arrangement would end and started thinking about what it would mean if it never did. That evening, Melissa discovered that some conversations change everything, and some truths are too big to take back once they're spoken. She was sitting on the floor of Anthony's living room, Brian propped up against her legs, when Anthony finally came home from his investor meeting. The Chicago skyline twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she'd been humming Amazing Grace, while Brian played with a soft toy from Target. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up as Anthony loosened his tie. His face was unreadable, but she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of his moods over the past weeks. "We got the funding," he said, but his voice lacked the excitement she'd expected. $2.5 million for the next phase. "Anthony, that's incredible." Melissa lifted Brian up, making him giggle. "Did you hear that, little man? Your daddy is changing the world." But Anthony wasn't smiling. He sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture she'd come to know so well. "How was the appointment?" he asked. "Perfect. Brian's growing beautifully, hitting all his milestones. Dr. Chen said he's in the 90th percentile for height." She settled Brian in his bouncy seat, where he could see both of them. She also said he's clearly bonded with his primary caregiver. "You," Anthony said quietly. "Me," Melissa confirmed, feeling heat creep up her neck again. "Anthony, about what I said earlier, calling myself his mama," he finished. "You called yourself his mama?" The word hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. Brian babbled happily, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above his head. "I shouldn't have," Melissa said carefully. "I know Elena is his mother, even if she's not here. I never want to replace her or—" "Stop," Anthony said, his voice sharper than she'd heard it before. He stood up, pacing to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "Just stop." Melissa felt her heart sink. She'd overstepped, gotten too comfortable, forgotten her place in this carefully constructed arrangement. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Anthony turned around, and she was surprised to see tears in his blue-gray eyes. "You're sorry? Mel, do you have any idea what you've given us?" "What you've given me?" She stared at him, confused by the emotion in his voice. "I spent 6 months failing at being Brian's father," he continued, his words coming faster now. 6 months of him crying every time I tried to hold him, of feeling like Elena's death was my fault and now I was failing her son too. I was using the Calm app 3 times a day just to function, and I still couldn't sleep because I was terrified something would happen to him on my watch." Brian made a soft sound, and Melissa automatically reached down to adjust his position, the gesture so natural it was unconscious. "And then you walked into my life," Anthony said, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Not just to help with Brian, but to show me what being a parent actually looks like. You don't just feed him and change him and put him to sleep. You know that he likes his left foot tickled more than his right. You know he calms down faster when you hum gospel songs. You know he's getting sleepy when he rubs his ear. Those are just details," Melissa said softly. "Those details are love," Anthony replied, "and Brian knows it. I've watched him light up when he hears your voice in the hallway. I've seen him reach for you when he's scared or tired or just wants comfort. You are his mama, Mel, not because Eleanor isn't his mother, but because love doesn't have limits." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something you've been afraid to hope for suddenly seems possible. "But it's more than that," Anthony said, moving closer to where she sat on the floor. "For it's watching you become yourself again. You were broken when I met you, and I was broken too. But together, taking care of Brian, we've been healing each other." He knelt down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "The investor meeting went well because I wasn't thinking about Elena for the first time in 8 months, he admitted. "I was thinking about you and Brian waiting for me at home. I was thinking about how I couldn't wait to tell you about the funding, to see you smile, to watch Brian try to grab my tie when I pick him up." "Anthony," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I love how you make Brian laugh, how you argue with me about the right way to fold his clothes, how you hum while you're cooking dinner. I love that you're practical and sarcastic and beautiful and strong enough to survive losing everything and still have room in your heart for us." Brian chose that moment to make a demanding sound, reaching his little arms toward them both. Melissa picked him up automatically, and Anthony's hand covered hers where it rested on Brian's back. "I love you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "I love you both so much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again after my marriage fell apart. But you two, you've made me believe in family again." Anthony's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "So what do we do now?" Melissa looked down at Brian, who was looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "Now we stop pretending this is temporary," she said. "Now we stop being afraid of calling this what it is." "And what is it?" Anthony asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "It's love," she said simply. "Messy and complicated and scary and real. It's a family that doesn't look like what either of us planned, but it's ours." Anthony leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle, while Brian babbled approvingly between them. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "There's something else," Anthony said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Melissa's breath caught. "I know it's crazy," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we've only been together for 2 months, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning, and I want Brian to call you Mama for real, and I want to build a life with you that's bigger than either of us imagined." But before Melissa could answer, Brian started crying, and this time, it wasn't the kind of crying that stopped when she held him. Brian's cries weren't stopping, and within minutes, Melissa realized this wasn't about hunger or sleepiness, but something that would test everything she and Anthony had just confessed to each other. "Something's wrong," Melissa said, her voice cutting through the romantic moment like cold steel. Brian's wails had an edge she'd never heard before, desperate and pained. She pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his small body. "Anthony, he's burning up!" The velvet ring box fell forgotten to the floor as Anthony jumped to his feet. "How high?" Melissa was already moving toward the nursery, her practical instincts overriding everything else. "Get the thermometer from his diaper bag. Now." The digital thermometer from CVS beeped ominously, 102.8 degrees. Brian's little face was flushed red, and his cries had taken on a quality that made Melissa's chest tight with fear she hadn't felt since Marcus's NICU days. "We need to get him to the hospital," she said, already grabbing the diaper bag with one hand while supporting Brian with the other. "Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Chen said to bring him straight to the ER if his fever went over 101. Anthony was pulling on his shoes, his face pale. "So should we call 911? Faster if we drive," Melissa said, wrapping Brian in a light blanket. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Months of medical appointments with Marcus had taught her to function in crisis mode. "Bring your insurance card and his medical records." The ride in Anthony's Tesla felt endless, even though Northwestern Memorial was only 12 minutes away. Melissa sat in the back with Brian, who had stopped crying and was now making weak, whimpering sounds that somehow felt worse than the screaming. "Talk to me, baby," she murmured, stroking his fevered cheek. "Stay with Mama, okay? We're going to make you feel better." Anthony caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Even in crisis, the word Mama felt right, felt true. The emergency department at Northwestern Memorial was controlled chaos. Bright lights, nurses in scrubs moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of antiseptic that brought back too many memories for Melissa. But when she approached the triage desk with Brian, everything happened fast. 6-month-old male, fever 102.8, lethargic, she told the nurse, her voice clinical and clear. No recent illness, up to date on vaccines, breastfed. The nurse took one look at Brian and immediately led them to a pediatric examination room. Within minutes, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the pediatric emergency physician, was examining Brian with gentle but thorough hands. "How long has he had the fever?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, using a specialized thermometer in Brian's ear. "We first noticed it about 30 minutes ago," Melissa replied. 103.2 now. He was fine this afternoon at his regular checkup with Dr. Chen. Anthony stood beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "Is it serious?" "Fevers in babies this young are always concerning," Dr. Rodriguez said honestly. "We need to run some tests to rule out bacterial infection. Blood work, Urine sample, possibly a lumbar puncture if his white count is elevated. Melissa felt her knees go weak. Lumbar puncture, spinal tap. The same word she'd heard in Marcus's NICU, words that meant they were looking for meningitis or other serious infections. "Hey," Anthony said quietly, his arm going around her waist. "He's going to be okay. He's strong, and he's got the best advocate in the world taking care of him." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and waiting. Brian screamed during the blood draw, his tiny veins difficult to find. Melissa held him through each test, humming gospel songs under her breath while tears streamed down her face. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she whispered against his sweaty forehead. "That saved a wretch like me." Anthony paced the small room, checking his phone obsessively, calling Dr. Chen's after-hours line twice for reassurance. But every few minutes, he'd come back to where Melissa sat with Brian, his hand touching her shoulder or stroking Brian's hair. "Text from Janny," Melissa said, checking her cracked iPhone screen. "Girl, you missed our Tuesday FaceTime. Everything okay?" She typed back quickly. "Brian's sick, at Northwestern ER. We'll call later." Janny's response was immediate. "OMG, on my way." "You don't have to deal with visitors right now," Anthony said, reading over her shoulder. "She's family," Melissa replied simply. "And Brian needs all the people who love him praying right now." At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez returned with Brian's test results. Melissa's hand found Anthony's automatically, both of them bracing for the worst. "Good news," the doctor said, and Melissa felt her entire body sag with relief. "Blood work is normal, urine is clear. This appears to be a viral infection, probably something he picked up from another baby or child. His immune system is doing exactly what it should, so he's going to be okay," Anthony asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He's going to be fine," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "Fever should break in the next day or two. Tylenol for comfort, plenty of fluids, and follow up with Dr. Chen if it gets worse or lasts more than 3 days." Brian had fallen asleep in Melissa's arms during the doctor's explanation, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in hours. His fever had already started to come down, 101.2 on the last check. In the quiet of the hospital room, Anthony sank into the chair beside Melissa's. "I've never been that scared in my life," he admitted. "Not even when Elena was in surgery. This was different. Because he's your son," Melissa said softly. "Because you love him. Because I couldn't imagine losing him," Anthony replied. "And I couldn't imagine going through it without you." Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so trustingly in her arms, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "When I was sitting here, holding him through those tests, all I could think was how this is what love looks like. Not the easy moments, not the Instagram-worthy pictures, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Anthony pulled the forgotten ring box from his pocket, setting it gently on the hospital table beside them. "Melissa Renee Clark," he said quietly, "will you marry me? Will you be Brian's mama for real, legally and officially? Will you build a family with us that can handle whatever comes next?" Through her tears, Melissa looked at this man who'd found her in a coffee shop when they were both broken, who'd trusted her with his most precious gift, who'd stood beside her through crisis without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." Anthony slipped the simple, elegant ring onto her finger just as Janae burst through the hospital room door, still in her pajamas and looking frantic. "How's my baby?" Janny demanded, then stopped short when she saw the ring. "Oh my God, girl, did you just get engaged in the emergency room?" Melissa laughed through her tears, holding Brian close while Anthony's arm encircled them both. Apparently, this family does everything the hard way. But looking around at the people who'd shown up for her, Anthony, Brian, Janny, even the kind hospital staff, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the most unexpected moments. 6 months later, Melissa stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at a pregnancy test that would change everything they thought they knew about their perfect life. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, impossible to deny. Her hands shook as she set the test on the counter beside the engagement ring that still felt new on her finger. Through the bathroom door, she could hear Anthony's voice mixing with Brian's happy babbling as they played in the living room of their Lincoln Park apartment, the place they'd chosen together, big enough for a family but cozy enough to feel like home. This can't be happening, she thought, her mind racing. Not now, when everything was finally falling into place. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of healing and building. She'd quit her job at Brewhaven and started taking online classes in early childhood development, funded by Anthony's insistence that her education was an investment in their family's future. Brian was thriving, walking now, saying mama and dada with equal enthusiasm, charming everyone at Millennium Park during their weekend picnics. Their wedding was planned for next month, a small ceremony at the same church in Bronzeville where Melissa had rediscovered her faith, followed by a reception with close friends and family. Even Eleanor's sister had reached out, wanting to meet the woman who'd brought light back into Brian's and Anthony's lives. But now this, another baby, another chance for everything to go wrong. "Mel?" Anthony's voice carried from the living room. "Brian's asking for you. I think he wants his afternoon snack." She splashed cold water on her face, trying to compose herself. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who'd changed dramatically over the past year, healthier, happier, with a confidence that came from being truly loved. But right now she looked terrified. Walking into the living room, she found Anthony on the floor with Brian, who was now almost a year old and getting into everything. Brian had inherited his father's curious nature and his mother's determination, a combination that kept them constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. "Mama!" Brian called out, crawling toward her with the speed that still amazed her. She scooped him up automatically, breathing in his familiar baby scent that always calmed her nerves. "How are my boys?" she asked, settling onto the couch with Brian in her lap. "Perfect," Anthony said, joining them. "Brian figured out how to open the cabinet where we keep his toys. Kid's going to be an engineer like his old man." Anthony looked different too, more relaxed, quick to laugh, the permanent worry lines around his eyes replaced by laugh lines. His sustainable energy company had expanded beyond his wildest dreams, but he'd learned to leave work at work, to prioritize dinner time and bedtime stories over late-night emails. "Anthony," Melissa said carefully, "we need to talk about something." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "What's wrong? You look pale." Brian babbled happily, playing with Melissa's braids, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling their living room. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Anthony went very still. "Pregnant. I took 3 tests. They're all positive." Melissa felt tears threatening. "I know we didn't plan this. I know we're still figuring out being married, being Brian's parents. I know it's too soon and too complicated and—" Anthony's hands cupped her face, stopping her panicked words. "Mel, breathe. I'm scared," she whispered. "After what happened with Marcus, after everything we've been through to get here, what if something goes wrong? What if I can't carry this baby to term? What if we're not ready?" Brian, sensing his mama's distress, reached up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand, making soft, comforting sounds. "Look at me," Anthony said gently. "Do you remember what you told me the night Brian got sick? About love not being the easy moments, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Melissa nodded, unable to speak. "I love you," he said simply. "I love Brian, and I'm going to love this baby. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what families do." "But what if everything goes perfectly?" Anthony interrupted. "What if this baby is healthy and strong and gives Brian a sibling to boss around? What if we're better parents this time because we've already learned how to love a child together?" Brian chose that moment to clap his hands, as if applauding his father's speech. The sound made them both laugh despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "Besides," Anthony said, his voice lighter now, "we've gotten pretty good at handling the unexpected." Melissa felt something loosen in her chest, not the complete absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Hope, mixed with trust in the man who'd shown her that love could survive anything. "So you're okay with this?" she asked. "I'm terrified," Anthony admitted. "But I'm also excited. Brian's going to be an amazing big brother." As if he understood, Brian looked between his parents and clapped again, making them both smile. 3 weeks later, at their first prenatal appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez at Northwestern Memorial, they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time, strong and steady, filling the examination room with the promise of new life. "Everything looks perfect, Doctor," Martinez said, pointing to the ultrasound screen. "Due date is March 15th. Would you like pictures?" Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand as they watched their tiny baby on the monitor, no bigger than a grape, but already loved beyond measure. That evening, they sat on their couch with Brian between them, looking at the ultrasound photos. Brian studied the pictures seriously, as if he understood their importance. "What do you think, buddy?" Anthony asked. Ready to be a big brother?" Brian babbled something that sounded remarkably like baby, making them both laugh. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Girl, you're glowing in these engagement photos. When are you giving Brian a sibling?" She showed the message to Anthony, who grinned. "Should we tell her?" "Let's wait until after the wedding," Melissa said. "I want one perfect day that's just about us, before we announce we're expanding again." Anthony pulled both of them closer, Brian settling contentedly against his chest, while Melissa curled into his side. Through their living room windows, Chicago sparkled in the distance, the city where they'd found each other, where they'd built a family from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. "I love our life," Melissa said softly. "Even though it's nothing like what either of us planned." "Especially because of that," she replied. "Marcus taught me that love doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but you and Brian taught me that happy endings can come from the most unexpected places." Brian made a sleepy sound, his eyelids getting heavy. Soon he'd be ready for bed, for the nighttime routine they'd perfected over months of practice. Bath time with extra bubbles, stories read in silly voices, lullabies hummed in the dark. "We're going to be okay," Melissa said, not as a question, but as a promise to herself, to Anthony, to their growing family. And for the first time since she'd seen those two pink lines, she truly believed it. 3 years later, Melissa Gabriel stood in the kitchen of their Evanston home, watching through the window as Anthony pushed 2-year-old Sophia on the swing set while 4-year-old Brian demonstrated his superhero jumps from the slide. The late afternoon sunlight caught the highlights in her braids, now styled in a sophisticated updo that reflected her new role as Director of Family Services at a non-profit in downtown Chicago. Her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet, still caught the light as she moved, but now it was joined by a simple wedding band and the engagement ring that had survived emergency rooms and midnight feedings and everything life had thrown at their unconventional family. "Mama, watch this!" Brian called out, performing an elaborate somersault that made Sophia clap her hands with delight. His blue-grey eyes, so much like his father's, but with Elena's warmth, sparkled with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted he was loved completely. Sophia, with her mother's dark curls and her father's serious expression, pointed toward the house. "Mama!" she called in her clear toddler voice, the word that still made Melissa's heart skip a beat every time she heard it. The pregnancy with Sophia had been different from her loss with Marcus, filled with cautious joy instead of devastating grief, supported by a partner who held her through every moment of fear. When Sophia was born, healthy and strong at Northwestern Memorial, crying loudly enough to fill the delivery room with life, Melissa had finally understood that some stories get second chances. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she called through the open window, earning a wave from Anthony and excited cheers from the children. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Still on for Sunday brunch. The kids are excited to see their honorary cousins." Melissa smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." Sophia's been practicing saying Auntie Janae all week. The kitchen smelled of the pot roast she'd learned to make from a recipe Anthony's mother had shared. Elena's favorite meal, she'd been told. It had taken time, but Elena's family had slowly opened their hearts to Melissa, recognizing that loving Brian didn't mean replacing his birth mother, but honoring her memory by giving him the fullest life possible. A framed photo on the kitchen counter showed Elena holding her pregnant belly, smiling with anticipation she'd never get to fulfill. But next to it sat a recent family photo. Anthony, Melissa, Brian, and Sophia at Millennium Park, all of them laughing at something Brian had said, not a replacement for what was lost, but proof that love could grow in the spaces between grief. The front door opened with the chaos that had become their normal. Brian racing in to wash his hands, Sophia toddling after him with grass stains on her Carter's dress, Anthony following with the inevitable collection of outdoor toys that never seemed to make it back to their proper places. "How was your day?" Anthony asked, kissing her cheek as he passed. His hair was slightly grey at the temples now, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her the way they had that first day in the coffee shop. "Good. The Johnson family finally got approved for adoption. I cried happy tears in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Melissa handed him plates to set on the dining room table. "How was yours?" "The Portland contract came through. We're officially expanding to the West Coast." Anthony grinned. "But more importantly, Brian informed me that he's going to marry his teacher when he grows up." And Sophia learned to say "please" when she wants something. "Peas," Sophia demonstrated from her high chair, clapping her hands. "That's my smart girl," Melissa said, kissing the top of Sophia's curls. As they sat around their dinner table, the one they'd picked out together at IKEA during their first year of marriage, practical but warm, Melissa looked at her family and felt the deep contentment that comes from building something real from broken pieces. Brian was telling an elaborate story about his preschool art project, complete with dramatic gestures that made Sophia giggle. Anthony listened with the patient attention of a father who'd learned to treasure every ordinary moment, and Sophia babbled along, contributing her own commentary in the language only toddlers speak fluently. "What are we grateful for today?" Anthony asked. The dinner tradition they'd started when Brian turned 3. "I'm grateful for my new sneakers with the lights," Brian announced seriously. "And for Mama making the good mac and cheese, not the box kind. I'm grateful for successful client meetings and for coming home to this chaos," Anthony said, reaching over to squeeze Melissa's hand. "Peas," Sophia contributed, which made everyone laugh. "I'm grateful," Melissa said, looking around the table at faces she couldn't have imagined loving this much just a few years ago, for second chances. For families that don't look like what you planned but feel exactly like home, for little boys who teach you to be brave, and little girls who remind you to find joy in everything. After dinner, after baths and stories, and the elaborate bedtime routine that involved 2 different nightlights, 3 stuffed animals, and Brian reading a picture book to Sophia in his most dramatic voice, Melissa and Anthony finally collapsed on their couch. "Tired?" Anthony asked, pulling her close. "The good kind of tired," she replied, settling against his chest, "the kind that comes from a life well lived." Through their living room windows, Evanston stretched peacefully around them, a suburb they'd chosen for its good schools and tree-lined streets, but mostly for the way it felt like possibility. Not the desperate possibility of people running from something, but the settled possibility of people who'd found where they belonged. Melissa's phone buzzed with a notification from her Dailyo app, a habit she'd kept even after the depression lifted, a way of tracking not just moods but moments of gratitude. Tonight she selected the bright green, radiant emoji and added a note, "Perfect ordinary Tuesday with my extraordinary family. Remember when you thought this was temporary?" Anthony asked softly, his fingers playing with her braids. "I remember being terrified that loving you both would break me," she admitted. I never imagined it would make me whole instead." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their house settling around them, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft whisper of the baby monitor, the distant sounds of a neighborhood full of families like theirs, all learning to love each other through the beautiful, messy work of being human. Later that night, as Melissa checked on both children before going to bed, she whispered the same prayer she'd said every night since Sophia was born. "Thank you for trusting me with them. Help me be worthy of this love." Standing in the doorway, watching Brian sleep with his arm protectively around his little sister in her toddler bed that he'd insisted be moved into his room, Melissa realized that some families aren't born. They're built one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to stay at a time. And this family, born from loss and watered with hope, had grown into something more beautiful than any of them had dared to dream. What would you have done in Melissa's place? When life breaks your heart completely, do you have the courage to risk loving again? And if you were Anthony, could you have opened your heart to someone new while still honoring the memory of your first love? Love after loss isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about discovering that the heart has infinite capacity to love again, differently, but just as deeply.